Right, and we're on. So, welcome everyone to the most blessed piece of content that this website has ever made. Um, this is the UFC Brazilians tier list, and I'm joined by dear friend of the site, dear friend of mine, Simon Amora, the only other person who appreciates old counterpunching Brazilians as much as I do. So, Simon, how are you?
I'm very good. I hope everyone's super excited for Saturday night, Blanchfield. I'm
Yeah, I
super into
forgot who
that.
she's.
That's what we're going to be talking about. We're just going to be talking about the striking game of Aaron Blanchfield. It's I hope you're all really excited.
I mean, there is a Brazilian there, but I guess we're not doing women's MMA Brazilians because that'd have to be a totally different tier. It's right above GOAT tier. You just can't see it. So,
Yeah, Nunez tier.
yeah, Andrade tier. Not
Yeah,
good Andrade, not Douglas Andrade. He's not there. But yeah, so this is we're gonna go through the long and storied history of MMA Brazilians, and I guess I kind of stole the actual tiers from a chess tier list. Hikaru Nakamura did it with I think Levy Rosman. That's where great but unlucky and great but lucky comes from. Because I think it's a really interesting way to look at this. Those two tiers, I don't think great but lucky is subordinate to great but unlucky. It's just, sometimes you're great, but you're unlucky. And sometimes you're great because you're lucky, but, taking advantage of that luck. As they say, luck is the residue of design. So GOAT tier, that's self-explanatory. Great but unlucky, great but lucky. Guys who didn't reach GOAT tier, but they have some level of, real greatness to them. And, sometimes the great but unlucky guys, they could have been GOAT tier if they were lucky. But, they're unlucky.
yeah, and usually the great but lucky guys not really ever close to being GOAT tier because
Yeah,
they're already getting the lucky boosts to be great anyway.
exactly. They've been buffed.
Yeah.
So solid contender, I guess we should probably go through and define these. So solid contender, I'd say guys who either were good top 10s or had the potential to be good top 10s. So below great level, but this can have both lucky and unlucky guys. How about you, Simon? Is that about what
Yeah,
you're thinking?
yeah. Top 10, top 15 for a good division, and then probably top 5 for a bad one if you're going to be in a solid contender. Because once you
Yeah.
get out into the 8, 9, 10, 11 in something like light heavyweight, I'm not really calling you a solid contender anymore.
Yeah, that's
But
Garbo tier.
if you're like the ninth best lightweight, you're probably like you were a solid contender. If you're the ninth best featherweight, you're probably a solid contender. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how you should be thinking about it. Like that you had a chance to beat guys in the top 5, you had the chance to beat title challengers in the right matchups,
Yeah.
that type of thing. Yeah.
Action fighter and okay, I think those two are kind of like similar in terms of skill, if that makes sense. Action fighter is just sort of the kind of guy who has more of a legacy because he's, an action fighter, just this wild dude who has a bunch of bangers. They can be solid contenders, they can be okay, but if they're closer to action fighter than both, then they're probably going to be here. So, I guess once we move on, you'll see, like, even just in that first row, there's the epitome of an action fighter who's been in, like, both of those realms. And when we get to him, you'll see him. But yeah, so action fighter and okay, like I don't think no one here, if anyone was like just straight up bad, we wouldn't have put them on the list because they're just not that interesting to talk about. The exception is probably the really old heads who, they could be bad by today's standards, but they were pretty solid by those standards. And those guys, we're probably just going to, we're going to judge them by their time, which is the only time we'll be doing anything remotely close to that. So, and of course, you see our bottom tier, which is Gracie. That seems explanatory enough. If you want to consider that as something that's separate from the rest of the list, that's your prerogative.
We could also just have called it fascist too.
Yeah, we could have called it mid bad
Well, actually,
grade of
then
the
we would have to
UFC.
put some goats in there, but
That's also true.
yeah, maybe like fascist but bad at MMA tier.
Yeah, that's just
Yeah,
fascist with no excuse for it.
yeah. Well, yeah, because being good at fighting is a good excuse for fascism.
I mean, definitely. Yeah, I strongly believe this. But yeah, so we might as well jump right into it. We're not in alphabetical order, although it looks like we're starting that way with Rafael Assunção.
We're in greatness order with a Assunção first.
This is definitely true.
Yeah.
So we spent all this time talking about great but unlucky, great but lucky. I think if there's one person who really embodies great but unlucky, it would be Rafael Assunção. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the skill level is completely there. The resume is honestly completely there,
Yeah.
but just to have like those like marquee wins in like title fights or against like guys who are really peaking, he just missed like ever so slightly, which is kind of the unfortunate thing. You know, he catches Sterling too early. You know, he catches Dillashaw a bit too early and then loses to him in his prime. Right? He's just missing like a few of those, and it's not really his fault. It's just the way his career panned out.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of situation where like those exact same wins at different divisions, even if those guys were exactly the same fighters, like I don't think Dillashaw was tons better against Barao than he was against Assunção. Like he was better, but he wasn't like a completely different fighter. He was still a horrible matchup for Rafael Assunção just on paper. And Assunção, I think he had a really good claim to winning that fight, and a lot of people, you know, think of it as a robbery in retrospect, which is another thing that hurts him. Moraes won, probably just a legit bad decision. Sterling, not really, but it was a slow, awful fight. And Dillashaw won. People sort of think of it the wrong way, and then, you know, the rematch sort of retconned the first one as being, oh, Dillashaw was better all along. He was just kind of young. So yeah, as you mentioned, there's, you know, he caught Dillashaw too early, he caught Sterling too early, he didn't really catch Moraes too early, but he caught Moraes right at the beginning of that big run, and then he lost to him in the middle of that big run.
Probably Font a bit early on Font too.
Yeah, that too. I mean, Font, like, he was kind of the same guy, but, you know, Font, one of those guys who made really incremental improvements, and people didn't realize he was top 5 until he was in the top 5.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, like in other divisions, even those are just straight up elite tier, title tier wins. Even in bantamweight, those are straight up elite tier, title tier wins. Just he didn't run into them at the right time. And in terms of his game, I think there are very few fighters who should be more influential who aren't. If you look at, you know, the classic mold of the Brazilian counterpuncher, there are very few fighters who do it as reliably as Assunção. Like if you watch, I mean, hell, even if you just watch Font, right? Like Font versus Jose Aldo, most people consider him a greater, better Brazilian counterpuncher, and that's completely fair. But Assunção did it safer than anyone could really hope to against someone like Rob Font. You know, brilliant wrestler, brilliant grappler, fantastic striker in his own idiosyncratic way. Victor Henry, another win that we hadn't really talked about, and, you know, we've yet to see how that ages, but right off that Barcelos win. So this is a true all-time great, but maybe just short of GOAT tier just because of his luck. So
yeah, it's really just it's the peaks and his valleys weren't at the right times for the division and for him, which is just like it's unlucky in kind of a way you wouldn't expect. It's not like major injury or kind of a fluke loss. It's just that his game was always kind of a balancing act, and his career was a little bit of a balancing act of waiting for title shots and taking really hard tests at the top of bantamweight for, you know, half a decade at least.
Yeah,
so
I mean, he did have a bad injury too, though, with Barao, right? That's where Dillashaw stepped in.
Yeah, that one definitely for sure counts as bad luck injury. Yeah,
he's just unlucky.
We're gonna have a good talk about Barao later, which is gonna be fun. He's always one of the most fascinating careers to talk about. So
yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of guys like Barao who sort of straddle the line between two of these tiers. And Assunção, he's 100% just a guy who the UFC just absolutely despised, and he got to greatness anyway, which is the kind of thing, you know, he's, you know, a Brazilian MMA god, one of the patriarchs. So
he's a standard bearer for the like not popular style, not really popular personality, but just too good to lose, too good to like, you can't shake him out of the division no matter how much
bantamweight's gadfly.
Yeah, it's and that's like, that is a classic great Brazilian archetype. It's just the guy who annoys the hell out of the UFC, annoys the hell out of Dana White, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Thiago Alves, I guess a little bit older school. Not really. He's not actually that much. I don't even know if he's older than Assunção at all, but he washed out quite a while ago, so it's actually a little bit hard for people to remember how great of a win he was for GSP specifically. Fantastic fighter, really good combination puncher, nice kicking into punches, punching into kicks. Really underrated anti-wrestler. Like, he had, you know, obviously a really nice sprawl. He had that clinch game. I think he beat, was it Koscheck? He beat pretty much entirely in the clinch. He was, like, really good fighter. Welterweight, just a tough division to make your mark with GSP on top. And he had, you know, some weird spots like that Campman loss. But I would say my initial lean is solid contender, which it sounds worse than it is, but that's my initial lean for Thiago Alves.
Yeah, I'm a big Alves guy. I was really into Alves when I was a kid. UFC 100. You know,
Yeah.
that was a big event. I love GSP. I loved Alves. I really loved the whole welterweight division besides Koscheck at that time.
I like Koscheck.
I just liked the way it was like just a street fighter division a little bit with all these like weird kind of different guys with Condon and Diaz and stuff. Anyways, but so I have a little bit of a bias. I was leaning towards great just because I think his athleticism was so high and his kind of like broad skill set in his prime. And he really did approach the GSP fight really a lot better than a lot of guys did. And
Yeah.
he took it to him in a way that some guys were afraid to, just with the takedown threat. But
yeah, it's tough to be a kicker with GSP. It's pretty much impossible.
yeah, but I think solid contender is probably fair, just because the wins don't rack up super high. It's not like he was around, beating great guy after great guy after great guy for years and years, and with like the kind of reliant athleticism. And the game wasn't super deep like other guys who are going to get put in like great but unlucky and great but lucky.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think solid contender is probably the space. But he is to me like an upper level solid contender just because
Definitely.
he was clearly top 5. He wasn't top, it wasn't 8, 9. He was clearly top 5 and he beat guys in the top 5. And
Yeah, I mean if you look at go ahead.
And yeah, if you just look at like guys who did that in the welterweight division at the time, you're quality. You're serious quality when you do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a situation where that entire era of welterweight gets a little bit underrated because of GSP. Like, you import Thiago Alves, Martin Kampmann, even guys like Josh Koscheck, as much as I do not like him at all, you import them into this division, they'll do pretty well. I think they'll be clear top 5. You look at guys like, Kobe Covington in the top 5, guys like, I don't know, Vicente Luque was there for a while, and we'll talk about him in a second. Like, you look at that quality of guy, I think Thiago Alves, he stands up there with all of them. So...
Yeah.
Francisco Trinaldo. This is an interesting one, I think, because
he's obviously like a fascination for both of us a little bit. You more than me, obviously. You're the biggest Trinaldo head on the planet, probably. But
so
I'll let you go.
Yeah, I think that's what's weird about Trinaldo is if you look at just longevity, you look at how he's done in 2 divisions. He's a guy who you can say absolutely got incredibly unlucky. If you look at what we said about Assunção, the sort of gadfly, the guy who the UFC just never wanted to succeed, Trinaldo is a guy who they noticed they didn't want to succeed a lot earlier before he got up to like the top 5. Because where Assunção, he was like, oh, you're top 5, but we don't want you to get any higher. Trinaldo was like, okay, I've seen your type before. Get the hell out of here. You're not getting in. So he had to go on like 6, 7 wins in a row, finish Paul Felder via cut, some really cool wins over the likes of Ross Pearson, that really cool performance against Kevin Lee where he nearly punched his guts out. And that was that run, and he lost to Kevin Lee. So it's hard to say he's really great, but I do think at the right time, with the right matchups, he had the potential to be a real contender. And I think that's backed up by how he's done since. Because since then, he knocked out Jai Herbert, he beat Evan Dunham. He has a couple of really nice wins. More importantly, he went up to 170, where I wouldn't say he's undersized, he's sort of a brick wall, but he's not a huge 170er, and he's an old 170er. And he looked ranked fringe level for a second. Like, yeah, he lost to Muslim Salikov, but he beat Randy Brown, in my opinion, and it's just like... he looked like if he were younger, he would be a real monster for that division too, which is insane. And I think if you just look at the depth of his game, he has kind of the classic. It's weird because in a lot of situations, Trinaldo was like a lot more violent than you'd expect. Massive, huge body shots, the body knees, the clinch game. He manhandled a middleweight in the clinch in his like first or second UFC fight, Delson Heleno. But the reputation and the way he tended to fight was that, cagey Brazilian counterpunchy type where he'd just stand there, take little angles in the pocket with that inside angle counter and just sort of let you run into a wall all the time. So it was a really weirdly versatile fighter. And I think, and he was actually a really surprisingly good clinch and wrestling fighter. If you gave him someone like, I don't know, even like Dustin Poirier, I don't think he'd win, but he'd throw him into the ground at least once. So I'd say upper tier solid contender. It's just he had less to show for it than Thiago Alves, if that makes sense.
You think he's okay? So we're gonna have a disagreement then. So I have to cover. So I think I really like Trinaldo, and he was really good. And a thing about him was his like run. He was so much older than you think he was
Yeah.
during his main run. Like his career exists after the age of 36, which is like an
Absurd.
insane thing about him, right?
Yeah.
Which there's very few fighters in MMA history that have a career that looks like that. And I do think he had a lot of cool tools and some underrated athleticism to pair with them as a puncher. Obviously, Jai Herbert learned that lesson. But I think when you look, his best win is probably Paul Felder. Would you say that's his best win?
I'd probably say that, yeah.
And it is a cut stoppage, which he was winning that fight.
Yeah.
To be clear, he was winning that fight. It's not like the cut stoppage bailed him out, but it was a cut stoppage fight, which is not always like the cleanest way to win. And then he's not finishing guys who you're like, if you were really good, you would just be, you would be clocking these, at least a few of these guys. But it's a lot of decisions in a row, and then it's not going to Chad Laprise in like one round because he wasn't good. But it's like Norman Park. You probably should. I want you to walk over Norman Park a little bit more for like that upper solid, because I do agree that he's probably closer to 10 to 15, but it's a good division lightweight, and it was a good time for lightweight too.
I mean, I think you could also say like he had the weird loss to James Vick. And he had the weird loss. It wasn't really a loss, but not running over Alexander Hernandez looks worse and worse. And yeah, he was already like, he was of the,
like
of the dinosaur age at that point. Like he's 1,000%.
I think he literally was 40 when he fought Alexander Hernandez.
Like
he 40.
He clearly won that fight, but like there's definitely something to be said about Trinaldo being, just because of his age, a little bit less than the sum of his parts by the time he got to that stage. But I do think, even if you look at him when he was, like from the industrial age and not from like the Paleolithic era, he is like one of those fighters who, if you gave him a shot at the top, he would have done a lot better than people expect. Like if you look at that run during the Felder, Lee, that sort of era, I don't remember exactly who was at the top. He wouldn't have beaten, obviously, guys like Khabib or anything, looking at that Chiesa loss. But against a lot of the strikers, against a lot of the guys who are on top, who didn't really have that sort of versatility, which lightweight has always been that kind of weird division, right? Like the meta seems to swing a lot more than normal, where guys aren't really all that well-rounded that often. It's either big strikers or big grapplers. I think Trinaldo would have done actually quite fine at the top 10 level. And I think it's also kind of interesting because if you look at fights like Jim Miller against another southpaw, where he randomly showed a really sharp jabbing game for no reason, he's the kind of fighter who, if you gave him the right shot, I feel like he would have shown that level. But I do understand the argument that like he does have some weird moments and he didn't really have the wins. So I'm kind of fine with lower tier solid contender, but I think we have to compare to the rest to see.
Yeah, we'll put him in. I'll put him in solid contender for now, and then we can look at it and feel like if he belongs in like an unlucky. So I was just thinking of like 2016 low ranked top 10 lightweights, and there's like Michael Johnson, who was up at 5 at a point. There's Edson Barbosa. There was Nick Diaz, who I think he still had a ranking before the Conor fight in 2015.
Oh, Nate.
Sorry, Nate. Yeah, not Nick. Yeah, Nate Diaz, who I think still had a ranking at lightweight in 2015 because he had still beaten MJ recently. And I'm looking, and like those are guys who can have weird bad fights and bad performances.
I think Trinaldo might have whooped all of them, except maybe Barboza.
But I was thinking like, Barboza would, I think he's probably a bit too much, but it's definitely interesting to think about how much he could have hung in that Michael Johnson, Barboza, Diaz space, right?
Definitely.
But yeah, okay, we can move on to the next one. This one isn't going to be much easier, to be honest.
Yeah, this one's tricky.
I can start with this one. So to me, I would put Anderson Silva in GOAT tier. And this is maybe a little bit of a controversial opinion for some of the viewers at the fight site, just because like you look at the resume, it's like, Yushin Okami, and there's like Talis Latus, and those types of wins.
Yeah.
And you're like, why should these count more than Ross Pearson for Trinaldo, right? Like, how are any of these guys better than Ross Pearson? And I think I'll give like two reasons. One is that he was like massively above those guys. Like, he treated them like they were not on his level, even if he put on bad fights sometimes, like Talis Latus and Patrick Cote and stuff like that. Those guys were never, they were scared of him while they fought him. They never gave themselves a chance to win, even in the bad fights. And then against a lot of guys, he just smoked them, right? Like, treated them like they. So there's a level of competition, but then there's also him easily exceeding it. And then also, I do think that Anderson Silva was a little bit of a fighting savant, in just because he was so far ahead of his division. I feel stronger that if you put him in more competitive fights and in a more competitive time, he adapts and he improves more than he was forced to in his division. This sounds a lot like an argument for great but lucky, but I believe in Silva as like a generally great fighting mind and having a great fighting athleticism that carries him even in a good division, even against some good fighters, which he didn't fight a ton of, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think for me with Silva, I can see him in any of the top 3 tiers, if I'm honest, because I guess I can make an argument for each of them, right? Great but lucky. There's the argument that Silva, his opposition, as you mentioned, wasn't awesome for a lot of it. There are guys like Vitor Belfort, who he maybe caught a little bit early before he became that really scary kicker dude. Guys like Dan Henderson, who were okay at best. But I think you could also say he was great but unlucky because of what you just mentioned, right? Like, he was so far ahead of these guys, he didn't really get the chance to fight in a decent version. I guess middleweight's never really been like broadly decent. Like, there's always been, in Silva's era, there was like one great middleweight. Even at the best era of middleweight, there were like 4. So at that point, like, I think Silva would have done fine against a bunch of these really good middleweights. I don't think he'd have been crushed by many of them. If you look at, like, even Izzy, way post-prime, he didn't get crushed. I think Whitaker's a horrible matchup for him, but, like, Whitaker's a horrible matchup for anybody. Weidman beat him, but, like, Weidman's also kind of a tricky matchup. Silva and Romero probably stare at each other for a long time.
Definitely. I feel strongly about the staring contest there.
Silva and Rockhold, that fight's super weird. I kind of think Rockhold takes it, but it's not easy. Silva and Jacare, I'm not even sure about that one. Like, a lot of these fights are just fucking
he
weird.
brought weird fights out of kind of guys who are solid top 10 for a really long time, like Brunson, right? Like, just like, I'm gonna pull out a bullshit, dance around, low volume match against you. And he kind of did the same thing to Israel, even though Israel was a bit too smart for that and just kind of kicked his leg up. But even then, that's a weird fight he had with Israel.
Yeah, I mean,
that isn't a stomping by any means.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, there's also something to be said about influence. Because if you look at middleweight, there aren't really that many great defensive fighters aside from Whitaker. And Silva, for all, like, we say, like, he's kind of overrated as a counterpuncher, fighting almost no great offensive boxers. As a defensive fighter, he was genuinely brilliant. And it's really hard to find in MMA in general a fighter that good at not just, the exaggerated head movement, but, using the clinch entries and the little frames to obstruct guys. All that work, it's stuff that we haven't really seen since. And it's something that a lot of fighters would do better to watch. And in general, it's just like the stress of being a champion, right? Like, if you look at any other division, it's hard to be a champion for that long, regardless of your level of opposition. So with that, since I can say he can be in any of the top 3, I do think he got kind of lucky, just because, like, if you look at if you look at Jose Aldo's division, for instance, with all these guys who can, jab and feint and draw guys out of position and kill them, Silva, he wasn't in that kind of division. But I do think he'd have adapted better to, like, a division of, like, Kelvin Gastelums and Darren Tills than people want him to. Or I think he would have adapted exactly as well as people wanted him to. Actually, would have probably killed both of those guys or clowned them badly. So in that kind of situation, I'm open to, I think I'd say low tier, GOAT tier. We're probably going to squeeze a bunch of guys ahead of him. But
that's where I'm at right now. He'll be the first person in GOAT tier, but I think he'll be shuffling towards the back for me.
Yeah.
One thing I will say is there's all these, like, dead holes in his game, right? With wrestling and stuff. but he has moments of individual, like, I don't know if brilliance is the right word, but of just like, oh my God, these guys can't even deal with him on his like B game, right?
Right.
Where he'll like hit a switch on, was it Nate Barklart, and then just instantly
Yeah.
own him, or like just taking, I think he mounts, then takes Dan Henderson's back and gets the rear naked choke like super easily. Just guys who, even in like the area they like probably plan to be in a little bit to stay out of the striking, you're just like, oh no, I'm just going to own you here too. Where when you watch him, you're like, oh, this guy probably would have been really good if he just trained in a different era and was just brought up differently, because he has that. I do feel strongly Anderson Silva had that mind for fighting.
Yeah. I mean,
I wish he came up in a different time, because he had insane athleticism with his chin and his speed and his
definitely.
power. So yeah. And
Yeah. I mean,
also
I think
he came in old too. He's
that's
not
also
as
true.
not, he's no Trinaldo, but he was like 30 in his 30s before he was ever champ. So
Yeah, I mean, I think Silva mostly struggles in the discourse because we're always comparing him to like the legit bona fide all time Brazilian guys. Like if you compare Silva to Aldo, he doesn't come off looking good, but nobody comes off looking good next to Jose Aldo. And that's kind of the situation where people tend to talk about him. But in this list, he is 1000% upper tier.
yeah. So we
But
can move on to another
yeah,
great fighter.
to another great
2 in a
Brazilian.
row.
Yeah, another great old Brazilian, which is weird because Davison Figueiredo, he has never fought like an old Brazilian until maybe his last 2 fights. Like,
Yeah.
excuse me, like I think Figueiredo. So I think we're gonna run into this a couple times. I think he kind of straddles the line between great but unlucky and great but lucky. Um, if you look at great but lucky, some of it is just that. Well, what happened to flyweight, right?
Yeah.
Jussier Formiga beat him and then left. Demetrius Johnson probably would have whooped him just because of how he looked in the clinch all the time, and he left like before Figueiredo really came up. I think he was always a really bad matchup for Joseph Benavidez, but that fight looked way too easy for Davison Figueiredo. And on the other hand, though, if you look at great but unlucky, you have the way he was booked through the Moreno quadrilogy, which is just absurd to say. That should never have happened. And just how old he was when he showed up. And Simon, you mentioned this, right? Like Figueiredo, he is just kind of a freak among flyweights just because of how old he was when he just started becoming a contender.
Yeah, there's essentially basically he goes from complete unknown to like UFC guy owning John Moraga in no time. In terms of an MMA career path, he is very impressive what the kind of progress Davison made, and his rise to the division is very good. I mean, it's really just the one Formiga blot on his way up. But yeah, you talk about the unlucky with the just the age and the booking. When we talk about this, I think post the first Moreno fight, he would have gone out there and defended the belt against a Kai Kara France or a Pantoja rematch. I'm pretty confident about that. Despite how not good he looked in Moreno too, I think he would have done fine in that area, in those defenses. But he just didn't really get a chance to. And those are kind of like, that's like the free wins. I sometimes talk about this with Robert Whitaker, and his greatness is that
Yeah.
he loses the belt to Israel. He has these tough fights with Yoel, where he just had free wins against the likes of like a Rockhold and a Jacare and
Right.
these guys who just slightly missed out on title shots that he probably would have ended up defending against. But instead it was just like Romero twice, and then
Yeah, I mean, Bisping's another one.
and then injury. Yeah, it was just Romero twice, and then injuries in Israel. And it's like sometimes you don't realize how easy it could have been for guys to had 5-6 defenses, but instead they have 1 or 2, just
Right.
because of some very strange circumstances in their career. And you do have to take that into account sometimes, because sometimes champions who don't look so secure, they kind of look like flash in the pan champions, or divisions that are in weak spell champions. And really they could have been more dominant than they might seem. But then again, we talk about the lucky, which is just that the division did become a lot more shallow during his heyday in it. And the best guys who stuck around, like Benavidez and Formiga, they were right on the cliff basically. They still put in some good fights during his time, one of them beating him.
Right.
But they didn't have the ability to kind of, a Davison Formiga rematch. That's the kind of thing you want to see, right? But it's just Formiga just gets old right away after it, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is an interesting. You almost just are looking for we should have done just a great tier, or maybe
Yeah.
like a GOAT who's, I guess he could just go in GOAT tier. I think that might be where I end up saying. It's just that he's a little bit lucky, he's a little bit unlucky. It evens out. He's great. He's an all-timer. He's a champion in a division that has broadly skilled, athletic, technical fighters. So that should count for something.
Yeah, I think I'm at kind of the point where if you look at peak Figueiredo, he is like, it's easy to forget he was a legit pound for pound tier guy. Like it's, at this point, he's kind of overrated, or he was rather, like right in Moreno 3, Moreno 4-ish, he was kind of overrated as a pound for pound tier guy just because, like he was sort of carrying in what he did before, but he'd gotten old and the pound for pound tier, like the pound for pound is kind of sticky when it comes to that. It's not sensitive to guys getting shot while they're champion. But at his best, Benavidez 1, Benavidez 2, I guess Pantoja. I mean, probably Elliott and Perez, but those fights didn't really show anything. And Moreno 1, that is a legit pound for pound tier fighter, a fantastic fighter, and a really unique one for flyweight. And I don't think you'll see another guy like him at flyweight for a while, because the guy who beat him, he's pretty much Father Time incarnate, right? Like Moreno, he is built to outlast everybody who exists. That is his style in fights. That is his career management style. That is what he did in the trilogy. That is just how he has been. So it's tough to really fault Fig for that. And yeah, he did get a little bit lucky, but like even to get to that point of getting lucky, he had to overcome a lot of bad luck with how old he was, right? I think he was mostly unluckier than he was lucky. So yeah, I'm fine with that. I think Benavidez 1 is a better win than anything Silva has. So I'm fine with this placement. But he's one where I'm kind of like, he's another, any of the top 3 tiers for me.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I'm going to err on the side of safety as him as the champion, as him as a guy who had defenses.
Yeah, he's just too cool. He's too cool to deny.
Goat among the, I wouldn't put him in like a goats of MMA list, obviously, but I would put him in goats of Brazilians.
Yeah, that's a fair way to put it.
That I feel good about. Okay,
yeah, I mean, I think
move on to the next one maybe, or do you want to finish?
Yeah, it was just like, I don't think, to clarify GOAT tier, I don't think this is like greatest of all time as in like, certain top X lists. It's just, this guy is cool as shit. Like, we love him. So that's what Fig is. Like, you watch him, you can't help but, and really, I think he deserves a lot more credit for Moreno 3 too. Because I don't think you see guys making that switch. I think there's like a little post I made where like every Brazilian chooses between being a Charles Oliveira or a Rafael Assunção, or either you're aggressive front choke aggressive man, or you're throws 6 feints around and 1 right hand and are impossible to beat man. And Figueiredo went from 1 to 2 after 1 loss against Moreno. So that's pretty rare. Like, guys don't do that. He's a unique fighter in a bunch of ways. So
yeah, and I love him. So I'm hitting the I love him button. So he gets to go where I want him to be.
Yep.
If this was Ryan Wagner's podcast, he could put him in action fighter and say he
put him in
sucks or whatever. But I love him, and this is ultimately guided by our emotions. So
definitely.
Okay, we can move on to Carlos Diego Ferreira.
Yeah. Ferreira, I think honestly, Ferreira is a really underrated fighter. And I'm going to say that for a bunch of these guys. I think he was kind of old when he became relevant. He was in the UFC for a while. He lost to Poirier. He lost to Dariush. And then he went on this just insane run that was pretty much under the radar for the whole thing until he beat Taisumov. And, excuse me, Taisumov, like, that's a win that people won't really appreciate at this point. But that is a stupid win to have when you're a guy who's, like, stuck below the top 15 for your whole career. Like, Ferreira looked like a legit contender that fight. That performance was psychotic. It was absurd. And like for a grappler who's mostly known as like a counter wrestling guy, he just went in, he left hooked the crap out of him, just swarmed him horribly, like walk through fire for it. And that by itself is like solid contender tier stuff for me. I think in general, he got a little bit unlucky just with the booking because, Beneil Dariush, fighting him once, you get unlucky. Like, no one should have to fight Beneil Dariush. Dude's a monster. And like, he's never really gotten his due, right? Like, losing to Beneil Dariush, it always looks less good than losing to any other guy that good just because he looks kind of unathletic and people don't really care about him. But that is not a bad loss to have. But, he just got kind of old. And I think he was kind of a fringe top 7-ish guy at his best. He just really never really got his due. So, yeah, I'd say he was about Trinaldo tier. How about you?
Yeah, I feel a bit better about the action fighter tier just because that kind of like late peak he had, the classic old man Brazilian little that like there's always that 3 to 5 fight run where you're like, wow, he's looking nice, and then it's off the rails. Just I don't love it the way I like Trinaldo's little run he does. I think is like clear of CDFs. I think it's like a much better little run.
I mean, Trinaldo also had like 4 of them. So.
Yeah, that's true. Because with CDF, it's like Taisimov retires right after he beats him. Never fights again. I don't think he will. So you're like, oh, it's a bit iffy, but I do like Taisimov. And then it's Kyle Nelson. Jared Gordon has aged surprisingly well as a finish win because he's not like super easy to finish unless you're Charles Oliveira.
Also, that hammerlock was stupid. That was such a good finish.
And so they're not awesome with like Kyle Nelson. He beats Pettis, and Pettis doesn't look totally washed after he beats him. It doesn't look like the Pettis who beat like Wonder Boy or Chiesa, but it's still the Pettis who, had that good fight with Morono and looked a lot better than shot Donald Cerrone. So it's not like fantastic, or it's not that solid Pettis win, but it's also not a shot Pettis win either, I don't think. So I think it's just a bit too short for me. I think I would probably put him in kind of like the really solid action fighter spot.
Yeah. I think that's
and also his game is a bit janky to me. I don't love like the aesthetics of it. His striking, has some real jank to it. The way he like would come in behind, Ray's leg against Taisimov.
Oh yeah,
it was neat, but it's also like, wow, if you fought someone really, really fast who knew how to like counter you for hopping in like that, you could be in like big trouble. So
yeah, I mean,
there's an aesthetic argument against him a little bit for me, not as a grappler. As a grappler, he's pretty darn cool. A wrestler for sure. Yeah. He's pretty cool. Ed had a good piece about that, I think.
I think there's definitely an argument that like CDF, he didn't run into any like really fantastic contenders other than Taisimov, who like really carries him, and there's the argument that Taisimov was never really as good as he looked if he retires right after CDF. For the most part, I think he was competitive enough against Dariush, I think he nearly finished Gillespie, and he was doing well against Gamrot. So you have a bunch of like, nearly didn't look bad situations with him. But yeah, I'm cool with like fringe action fighter / solid contender, like higher end action fighter type deal.
Yeah, that's where I'm thinking he's there right now. And that's a good place to talk because we're gonna move on to Edson Barboza now.
Yeah, I mean Edson Barboza, like I think he's kind of similar there. It's a lot harder to deny him as a solid contender just because
I feel he feels like the guy where it's like if CDF is like on that borderline, Edson is like he's the most clear mid solid contender.
Right.
And I mean mid positively because I'm an Edson Barboza fan. I know a lot of people aren't, but I like him.
Yeah, I mean he's cool enough. I think Barboza is just kind of like the classic sort of litmus test for guys who you want to succeed, if that makes sense. Like, are they athletic enough to navigate the risks? Are they smart enough to fight this guy in the right way? Can they compete at range and that sort of thing? So yeah, Barboza, it's really weird to say. I think he's kind of underrated in some respects. He's an underrated boxer in general, but he's kind of overrated in terms of how useful his kicking game was in a lot of fights. But on the other hand, he could just pull wins out of his ass like nobody's business. He did that against Beneil Dariush, obviously, and it's increasingly becoming clear that Dariush is kind of a more cogent fighter. So beating him, that's a big credit for Edson Barboza. There's a bunch of really solid under the radar wins, right? Shane Burgos, Dan Hooker, those are solid wins. He had Anthony Pettis back in the day. That's a fight that I feel like most people don't even know happened.
Melendez. He beat the crap out of Melendez.
Yeah, that was a really good one. And like even his losses,
so
right?
He beat Felder the first time around, and then they have a really close fight in Felder's prime which probably wasn't Edson's prime at that point.
Yeah, and I'm cool with
and
giving
they
that
put
to Edson
together
too. Yeah.
yeah, and that's a close fight. One thing I do like about Edson is he has one of my favorite things about a fighter, if people know me, is I love Neil Magny, and I love the Magny thing where you always own a certain matchup and you always lose to another one, and it's just so consistent, and I never have to worry about what's going to happen in your fights. And he does it to a level that Magny does not reach. So
Right.
that's an unfair comparison where he can completely own good fighters if they are his matchup. Like
Right.
he just beats the shit out of Dan Hooker, and then Dan Hooker goes on to have like a really close competitive fight for 3 rounds with Dustin Poirier, right?
Right.
Who's one of the best lightweights of all time, right? And he's just like, oh, I'm just gonna destroy this guy. I'm just gonna beat the shit out of Pettis, right? I'm just gonna kick up Melendez, right? So he has that ability to just like, oh, this is my matchup. I'm gonna dog walk you here, right? Like,
Right.
I'm just gonna kick the shit out of you. He knows how to lean on his A game when it's time, right? Like when he's allowed to, he doesn't hold back, and I enjoy that aspect of the fighter. And then obviously he has the matchup, which is like the pressure wrestler, where he's just gonna get. He doesn't have many ways to deal with it at all, and he kind of needs you to like dive into his flying knee, right?
Right.
To get out of it. But that's another part about him, which is that he is one of the toughest fighters, I think, of all time. I think he's really underrated for that. His Shane Burgos fight is unbelievably tough. I mean, he is old, he is cutting a ton of weight, and Shane Burgos is a hard puncher who fights in a very confident way. He comes at you, and Edson just sticks in that fight and keeps landing damage. Same with Khabib. He just sticks in that fight. He doesn't keep landing damage. He just
Kevin
gets
Lee
punched.
too.
Yeah, Kevin Lee. He rocks Kevin Lee horribly in the 4th round, I think.
Yeah, I think it was like 3rd. It got stopped after the 4th. He got like he
Yeah,
just got
maybe,
his
yeah.
ass beat. He got destroyed in that fight, and he stayed
So
in it.
he kept himself in fights, and he carried power late. Is another thing about him, which is like always, which helped with that, right? He like
Right.
was explosive deep into fights, even if he could only do it once every 2 minutes while running backwards. He would still throw, right? Like against Khabib in the 3rd round, I think he throws a wheel kick that throws him off his own feet when Khabib blocks it. But it's just like crazy hard and super fast for a 3rd round. You're like, oh my God, I can't believe this guy. So solid contender, a guy who won a bunch of good fights and really was able to punish some quality fighters, but big kind of gaps in his game in a lot of ways, and never really showed like that capacity to really like beat an elite guy.
Right.
So solid contender is
Yeah, I mean, I think
is where I like him.
Yeah, I think Barboza's kind of in that situation where he had a very high floor but kind of a low ceiling, where it's really hard.
Perfect. Yeah.
Like it's really hard to pick bad fighters over him, no matter how much they try. He's just too much of an athletic beast, and the margins are too thin. And if you stop for a second, he will completely destroy you. He will end your life with ease and pleasure. But after a certain point, like, if you get to guys like, I mean, hell, even like prime Michael Johnson, who was like a fringe top 5, 6 guy. Like if you think about the approach for a second and you're a good fighter, it's very possible to make him look kind of bad. But even then, you have to be really careful. Like with Beneil Dariush, right? Like that's a fighter who you're not going to have a fun time keeping him off you. But Barboza he needed 1 second. So yeah, I think solid. Like he locks himself into solid contender. Like that's just the kind of fighter he is. There's no situation, there's no universe where he is not a solid contender. He doesn't go above that. He doesn't go below that.
Yeah, that's definitely where I have him right now. Yeah.
But
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna move on. What's up?
Yeah, go.
Yeah. So Damian Maia, I think it's kind of funny because we just spent all this time talking about a specialist in Edson Barboza, and we're moving on to kind of another specialist in Damian Maia. I think Maia, he did better for his division, several title shots. But his limits were a lot more apparent. I do think he did a much, much better job working around his limits than people think. Just because, people are like, oh, he's this jiu-jitsu guy, he can't wrestle whatsoever. And yeah, that is kind of true. He can't wrestle the guys who are wrestlers. But, I mean, aside from Chael Sonnen. But when he was able to, get to his game, he is surprisingly difficult to deny. And the whole K1 Maya thing, like people laugh at it, right? But eventually you have to show that amount of like self-awareness where you're saying, okay, I can't just get every fight to the floor. How do I survive until I get it to the floor? How do I set up, the sort of pressure behind the straights and the southpaw game where I can get fights where I need them to be? And I think for all his strengths, even that's one thing that Jacare Souza never did, right? Is he never figured out how to get the fight where he needed it. He just sort of vibed. And that's one big strength of Damian Maia from a conceptual standpoint that I respect a lot. The downside is that when he ran into someone where he was outmatched, he was pretty seriously outmatched. Silva sort of clowned on him. Woodley didn't clown on him. Woodley doesn't clown on anybody, but that was not a good fight for him.
He doesn't really have anything for Weidman at all when they fight. The Shields fight is bad, like most Jake Shields fights are. Roy McDonald, he couldn't really do
that was ugly.
Against Colby, he puts up a much better, because Colby was such a bad striker at the time, and has regressed kind of back to that point now. He had a short peak where his striking looked fine. But I like Maia a lot just because I think he racked up a lot of you just look at the names and you're like, those guys were good fighters, right? You just you can go back pretty far with it too. You can go Rick Story, he was a good fighter. John Fitch, he was a good fighter. Gunnar Nelson, he was a good fighter. Matt Brown, he was a good fighter. Carlos Condit was a good fighter. Jorge Masvidal was a good fighter, right? You can just look at those names and be like, he beat good guys, and he showed that he belonged in those top 5 rankings for all the years he was there. And it wasn't a thing of oh, well, you just put him up against some good counter wrestler or great takedown defense guy that's in the top 15, and he can't do anything about him. I think he showed that he had enough to hold his place, as in terms of a broad skill set. He had just enough that he didn't need to super specialize and could only pull guard on a single leg or whatever. That's not the only way he had to win. Right. So I think he does have just a long kind of consistent record of good winning. And the guys who beat him, the lowest level guys you get in MMA who beat him are not low level. They're not, there's not crappy guys in his
even when he got old, it wasn't
at all. Yeah, no, it's still Gilbert Burns and Bilal Muhammad. Those are still guys who are really good.
I mean, I thought I wasn't super convinced he beat Tony Martin, to be honest. But also Tony Martin was good. And
Tony Martin was quality fighter.
When you're that old, you should be getting killed by Lyman Good, and he wasn't. So at that point, there's really not that much you can say about, even when he was old, his style was pretty old resistant. He fought an old guy who knew what he was good at from the start of his career. So I'd definitely say it's interesting because I wouldn't say he was lucky or unlucky. His matchmaking was pretty normal through his career. And if he was unlucky, it's just because there were bad matchups for him in his division, but any division you have, realistically, you're going to have some guys who are bad matchups. I'd say very, very, very top end of solid contender.
Yeah, he's to me, he's so high in solid contender. You can kind of think of him as that, not unlucky, not lucky, just he was great, but he wasn't a goat, right?
Yeah.
So if people want to look at the tier list and say these guys at the top of solid contender, they were really good, right? They were really, really, really solid contenders, and you have to be great to be that. So,
solid contenders are pretty wide range.
Because it does range from a guy who's 12th and was there for a long time, and a guy who was 4th and there for a long time.
Right.
His ceiling, again, he had a lower ceiling in terms of these long running contender guys, right?
Yeah.
And we'll have a good comparison for that later. But the floor is super high on him. Just so many quality wins. So yeah, top of solid contender is where he is among these guys right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Next couple guys, next two to be specific, very, very easy to rank, and I'm not sure there's a ton to say about them, but I'm not sure it's going to be about the ranking. So Vicente Luque, I would say just the definition of an action fighter. There is no one who embodies action fighter more than he does. Fantastic counterpuncher at times. a really sharp left hooker, really nice front choke guy, but he was kind of able to skirt around his limits a little bit at welterweight just because he sort of rode the Woodley train up to the top 5. But surprisingly, it was kind of better before Woodley. He gave Leon Edwards a pretty tough fight. He had a really nice run through a bunch of okay-ish, top 15-ish guys like, Randy Brown. Who else was in that run? A bunch of guys, actually.
Chiesa.
Yeah, Chiesa was a good one. He had like a set. There was like Brian Barberina. That fight was stupid and fun. But like I'd say Vicente Luque is kind of the definition of like a high-level action fighter. It's just, when you gave him someone like, you're like Bilal Muhammad too, for instance, where guys were able to think a little bit about him, he struggled. And I think, like even like Jeff Neal, that's not a horrible loss, especially when your game is so reliant on facing orthodox guys with a left hook and cross counter. But it's the kind of fight where if he was maybe a little bit more thoughtful about his skill set, like he would have passed a couple IQ tests to kind of beat the shit out of him. But
yeah, it's a little bit unfortunate because I think in his athletic prime, which probably is his athletic prime is probably better for his style than his like skill prime. So
right.
I think some guys, when you say the athletic prime, it's not their best. For me, Luque, his athletic prime is like probably when he was the best fighter.
Yeah, he never gained a ton of nuance.
Yeah, and it's just he is a little bit unlucky just because he didn't get the chance to fight great guys at that point. It's like early Jalen Turner, Nico Price, who isn't awesome or anything, Chad Laprise, who isn't good really, Barberena, who is I think fine and fun and kind of what you would put in like a low-level action fighter range. Derek Krantz, not good, right?
Yeah.
And then he has this split with Mike Perry, and Mike Perry is a guy who could look pretty okay sometimes and look bad sometimes. And I think looked fine in that fight. Not awesome or anything. And it's like, he has a close fight with Mike Perry, which you don't love. And then he gets completely just shut out, like in the worst way, by Wonder Boy. And you don't like that. That's always
right.
You don't want to watch guys get shut out. And then it's it's comeback. It's more Nico Price. It's Randy Brown, who isn't awesome, and especially even like 2 years ago when that fight happened, he's even improved a lot since that fight. And then it's a knockout over Woodley, which is probably his career-defining win, right? So it's good to talk about. I think I want to talk about that one just a little bit, which is, do you think he could have done that to Woodley in Woodley's prime?
Could he have? Definitely. Would he have? I'm not sure. Woodley's kind of the guy where, like, he never gained a ton of, like, okay, I'll say this. He never lost a ton of nuance through his shot period. But that's because he started with so little nuance that it's really tough to lose it. Like, he had, like, how, like, Dan Henderson was always really dangerous, even super late into his career, and he, like, gave guys a bunch of scares? That's kind of where Woodley was, where his game was so simple to start with. It's really hard to lose that one little bit that makes him really hard to beat for a bunch of guys. And I think he was, like, a bit faster, a bit, sharper. Luque probably would have been a winnable fight. But on the other hand, he's still an orthodox guy with a left hook. So I think, like, Luque winning that is less of a credit to him as a fighter and more of, like, he caught him. A, he caught him at the right time, and B, he happened to be the right kind of fighter, which I guess you could reduce a bunch of wins to that. But Woodley, like, really specifically, that's the kind of win it was. So, yeah, I think he could have, and I guess it's definitely Luque's best win. But I don't know. I feel weird about holding it in too high regard.
Yeah, it's hard because you almost want to go like, well, how good of a chance does he have to doing that to a guy who was a defending champion? And then you're like, well, if he had a decent chance to doing that to like a prime Woodley, why isn't he a solid contender? And then but it just becomes hard to say, like, would he really have put up like really competitive fights if he got the chance with Usman and Colby and like prime Masvidal? Maybe with some of those guys, maybe he could have had a good 5-rounder with Leon. I kind of doubt it. I do doubt it.
Yeah. I think it's kind of a situation. Oh, go ahead.
It's interesting because it's almost like I feel sometimes that Gilbert Burns, and maybe this is spoiling later, is a bit like the lucky Luque in a little bit of ways, but also I feel like he got lucky because he did smarter things in fights and made his career last longer and was able to have a more consistent way to win than Luque was ever to figure out with his style.
Right.
So
Like I said this earlier, that luck is the residue of design, and that's sort of where you're looking at with both of these hoofed guys, where both of them kind of, and they build really simple, proficient skill sets with Henry Hooft, who, both of us hold him in very high regard. But Luque, he sort of didn't have a way to win that wasn't walking directly into the fire and having guys walk into the fire against him. Gilbert Burns, he had that sort of, he had the grappling to fall back on, but more importantly, he could like enforce his game a lot better. If you look at like Bilal Muhammad, I think Gilbert would probably kind of beat the shit out of him, where Luque, he struggled. So
yeah, and Gilbert surprisingly has a bit more of like a swing ability than Luque does, where it feels like Luque, the more the more he starts to lose, the losing is just snowballs for him in fights, right? It's like once the guard's up, once his reaction is gone, he's hunting more, he's more desperate, he's missing wider and wider and wider. Just not a fighter who I'm like super confident in their in-fight IQ, which is an overused term, but sometimes you look at a guy and you think, this guy's not a great, thinker.
Yeah, I think Luque is just kind of the definition of a well-oiled machine. I think like Hooft gave him a couple really nice tools, and he's going to keep doing them, and he's going to stay sharp with them. But he's never really going to learn, and he's not going to stop doing them. So if you look at someone like Jeff Neal, for instance, who just had consistent ways to keep avoiding those tools, Luque is never really going to figure that out because he's a machine. So
yeah, he did have one win that aged well, which was Bilal, but then he fights him so poorly in the rematch. You're like, oh man, maybe you wouldn't like
the first one's retconned.
Yeah, it's a little, because you watch the fight, you're like, well, Bilal's style is pretty, it's not good for fighting a Luque type,
And he nearly got killed in the third round again.
Yeah, right. So, but also it almost feels like a fluke, the part where he almost gets killed, because Luque is so bad at getting to that part in the fight. As soon as Bilal realizes in the rematch that he should just circle, or I guess realizes between fights that he should just keep circling and jabbing and moving and throwing little feints and getting right, just getting like nice angles on stuff, right, keeping them busy. I think I would be fine with a low solid contender, just because the Woodley win, and just because he had so much power, and welterweight isn't like super awesome. But I think top of action fighter right now is probably the better spot.
Yeah, I think we kind of saw his peak. We saw what could happen if he high rolled it, which he did, right? Because Woodley, it bumped him all the way up into top 5 in a way that you wouldn't really get otherwise. But after a point, it's just tough to justify him as more than that when his absolute top end peak was still losing to Bilal Muhammad the second time. Yeah. So next one.
We said Luque would be quick, and we kind of lied because I made it more interesting because I had a slightly different opinion than you. But although this one is quick,
this one's so easy.
The greatest fighter ever. His resume is impeccable on like wins, on defenses. His skill level is incredibly high. He's one of the most well-rounded fighters ever. One of the most well-built games a fighter's ever had.
Yep.
Complete games. He has multiple peaks that he reaches of like at different ages and at different weight classes. He fought so many good fighters and looked good even in losses, like Holloway and Jan, where you don't even want to take much away from him in those.
Yeah.
He's the greatest fighter ever, in my opinion. And it wasn't always that way, but he is the greatest fighter ever now, for sure.
Yeah,
so he's the GOAT. He's the GOAT here. It's for him, basically.
The definition of GOAT tier.
Yeah.
Like I think there are actually even some things that people forget about Aldo, right? Like, he has the whole old Brazilian thing down pat. Like, he became a clear old Brazilian type guy, which is really rare when he started out as an aggressive young Brazilian. Like, we said that against Davison Figueiredo, right? But he managed that for one fight. There was one fight where he went from...
Aldo has a second career as an old Brazilian.
Exactly. Like, he started out in WEC as this wild, crazy dude who just throw wild shit. And then he came to the UFC and he became classic old Brazilian when he was young. And then he became old Brazilian when he was old. This is 3 different fighter careers mashed into one. And I think the other thing that it's kind of tough to say that people beat bad style matchups because, like, if you beat them, they don't look like bad style matchups anymore. And, you know, like, if you look at a bunch of all-time great contenders, they beat guys who are hard for them. But I think Jose Aldo, you look at Mark Hominick and Rob Font specifically, those are guys that Jose Aldo should be having shit tons of trouble with. Like that, those are not good matchups for him. And Jose Aldo beat them, what, 4-1, 5-0? I think Hominick was 4-1 and Font was maybe 4-1, 5-0. Like,
that sounds right.
Those are that is insane in a way I think people don't really appreciate because, like, yeah, everyone knows Mendes 2, that's a stupid win. Edgar 1 and 2, that's a stupid win. Yeah, Mendes 1 is a stupid win, I'm going to be honest. But, you know, like, you look at all those wins, those are crazy. But you look at Rob Font, the final win of his career, a horrible style matchup over 5 rounds, a genuinely elite fighter who is just a meta that Aldo has essentially forced into existing. Like, you do not get that anywhere else. I don't think you'll ever get that again. And yeah, maybe I overrate Rob Font a bit, but that only helps here because Font rocks. Font's so good.
We can't turn it into a Font podcast. And yeah, like,
watch me.
Rivera is like hard because he puts on such a pace and he's such a hitter, and he has the ability to like turn a fight on a dime with a nasty elbow and then, you know, a few knees that just drain you. And he was like, oh no, I'm just gonna old Brazilian you. I'm gonna take you back. I'm gonna hold on to your back for a round. I'm gonna, you know, keep you busy for the first 2. Nice counters, move in, hit your body. Yeah. Aldo, great. I think there's a pace to this that we've slowed down to. It's a crawl, but we can.
That's fine.
Aldo is great.
Yeah,
this is
we can move on.
Marlon Rice, this guy might take a little bit because there is varying opinions on him, and I think I'm a bit tougher on Marlon than other people. So I'll let you make the pro Marlon argument right now.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't huge on Marlon really. Like, for me, Marlon was like
okay, hate him. Okay, go. Okay. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, so the way I'm going to think about Marlon is I remember when Sandro, big friend of the site, he sent me a DM one time of this parody of Run This Town that was sung by this random YouTuber, and he was like, okay, think of a random Jose Aldo guy who fights like Jose Aldo, but he can come out to something that's like not Run This Town, but way worse. And my first thought was Marlon Moraes, and Moraes wasn't bad enough for it. Marlon Moraes is more like the Lil Wayne version of Run This Town, which is still kind of solid, but not amazing. But yeah, Marlon Moraes, I think he straddles the line between great but unlucky and great but lucky in an interesting way. And I said there are going to be a bunch of guys who walk that line, right? Because great but lucky, you could really argue that he high-rolled the big streak that he had in the UFC. Because if you look at, like, not even just, you know, he fought old guys, but he fought in matchups who weren't, like, really specific sort of matchups, right? Like, he fought Rafael Assunção, who is a lower pace than him. And he lost that fight. I think he won, but, you know, he got suckered into the Assunção game. And at some point, like, at that point in Assunção's career, you get into that fight, like, you deserve it. That's your own fault. But yeah, he had Dodson, he had Rivera, he had early career Aljamain Sterling before Aljo became, you know, the sort of crazy, really nice striker that he became later, and he had Assunção again. So all those guys are kind of lower pace strikers. Jose Aldo couldn't really hold a pace, and any time you put him against someone who could safely drive a pace in the UFC, you know, from like long range or could draw him out a bit, Moraes kind of looked like shit. But I think you could really argue that he came into the UFC so late that he wasn't really all that lucky to start with, right? Like, he had a full PFL/WSOF career before coming in, and now he's back in the PFL. So I feel like I lean great but lucky for him. He has a really short UFC peak, but a really, really nice one. You know, completely murdering Rafael Assunção. That's not something that anyone does with that much ease. Jimmy Rivera, a very good win, even if it was really short. John Dodson, not easy to beat. And Aljamain Sterling, like, at that point in his career, not anything insanely special, but nothing to scoff at. So yeah, I say great but lucky.
Yeah, general, so I think I might end up being a little bit more in favor of him than you are, actually, because he had that counterpunching game that was really powerful and fast, and he definitely had like this competent boxing base to him that allowed him to just, you know, no trouble at all with Sterling. Jimmy Rivera, I'm just gonna outspace him and head kick him with some nice feints, right? Yeah. Assunção, I'm gonna just be way faster. I'm gonna find a hole. I'm gonna hurt him. And then I think he did have like like a good bantamweight should. He had, he knew how to wrestle. He had grappling. He wasn't, this, flake there, right? But again, the run is super short. He gets there a bit old. He gets there with more miles than you might think. And he just struggles so hard with the specific pace, Sandhagen, Cejudo, Font like matchup, right? Where it's like, well, Font's not exactly a super high paced fight, but Font is keeping you thinking all the time, right? And he's driving like a mental pace that's fast for a lot of guys, right? So I think, yeah, I'm fine with Great But Lucky. If you wanna, if that's where I think that's fine. I think he's a little bit unlucky in that like his body deteriorated so quickly, and that he didn't have this like durability to kind of stick around. But he is lucky in a way in that like the matchups he fought, his best wins are not tough fights for him. Sterling later in the career would have probably been a really nice test because Sterling was able to occupy with a lot of volume and length and trickiness that requires more than just, high kick, right hand cross counters, right? You have to be a little bit smarter than that. You have to be more of a Peter Yan, right? So,
well, evidently not. You have to be more than Peter Yan.
You have to be more than, you have to be a little bit more than Peter Yan. So, yeah, I think he was a little bit lucky, even if the age stuff wasn't fortunate for him in his career, the durability stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on how you think he would have done against the likes of Sandhagen and Font if he was younger, because I feel like those are always really tough fights for him. The thing with Moraes is that he's fine counterpunching, but in general, he wants to be the guy drawing stuff out, working around you, moving around you at his own pace. That's why Rafael Assunção the first time, that was such a good showing for him. And it was a good showing for Assunção, right? Like, they both fall into that sort of situation of Assunção wants to be the guy reacting, and Moraes wants to be the guy being proactive. And Assunção is the only guy low-paced enough to allow Moraes to be really all that proactive all the time with his tank, with the pace that he prefers, where Moraes wants to be jabbing in and out. And if some guy's just constantly feinting and jabbing at him, he just hates it. He does not like fighting that kind of fight all the time. So in that kind of situation, like I think Prime Moraes probably beats Prime Sterling, just because Sterling may be a little bit too kickable given the Yan fight, the Munoz fight. But Font and Sandhagen are probably trickier fights for him at any time.
Jan's probably also pretty tricky for him,
Yan
just because of how much
of
a monster he is, durability and cardio wise.
Moraes needs to finish in one round with Yan. So
yeah, and hasn't shown to be possible with Yan yet, right? So
it's going to be. It's going to be. Well, we'll see. But yeah, I think that's kind of where I am with Moraes. Is he was a very good fighter, and I think being the #1 guy at bantamweight at any point in time, that is nothing to laugh at. That is like pound for pound #1 material at some time, which is why he's definitely in those top. Well, he isn't GOAT tier, but he's in the great tier. Yeah.
He did come in at like in a very maybe not a super noticeable way, a transition period for bantamweight, where Dillashaw was. He probably would have been getting old anyways. Garbrandt had kind of been not exposed, but had maybe started to lose it a little bit when he realized that he could be knocked out, that type of thing. And I mean, I think Marlon Moraes could have definitely beaten Cody Garbrandt.
Yeah, definitely.
But it was not a weak time for bantamweight. I just think maybe the best guys were not at the top. They were moving up it quickly, and he was just ahead of them by a little bit. I still like that he just totally owned Jimmy Rivera, though. That's not something everybody can do. So that's definitely like a guy who's great does that. A guy who's great just owns Jimmy Rivera, right?
Yeah, I think it's also kind of true of Dodson. Like, you don't clown Dodson without being something special. So I think, that's the thing, is if you look at like early 2019-ish bantamweight, like Assunção and Moraes were the clear top two, but then Sandhagen just like blows through both of them in the span of like 4 months. So that's definitely the case. But yeah, we can move on. I think Moraes is he's great, but But Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos, we're now in the lower tier of these rankings. I think.
We've hit a little bit. We had a good peak, and I think it's going to come down a little bit, and then we go back up again, which is fun. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, once we hit the old heads, I think it's going to be kind of artificially inflated. But yeah, Zaleski dos Santos, really fun fighter, kind of a brawler. I think he's kind of just the poster child for poor welterweight management, because there was a second where Luque, Zaleski dos Santos, and Jeff Neal, they were all sort of stranded below the top 15. And they were like winning a bunch in a row, and they were like really solid fighters. Of all of them, I think Zaleski kind of ended up the least special, which it sucks.
I think
Zaleski
he's
was
also
solid.
the worst probably of them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's just, it's weird because Zaleski, he had some moments of like being kind of solid. The Millender win, that's nothing, that's not horrible, especially the way he did it just super easily. But in general, Millender's Millender, nothing super great. I'm already kind of running out of things to talk about. It's kind of a brawler.
Yeah.
He was fine. I think low tier action fighter.
Yeah, he has there's like the Konchenko win. There's the Sean Strickland highlight, which is pretty.
I forgot about that.
Nice.
That's actually true.
He does lose a decision to Nicholas Dalby, which you don't love. I don't even remember that fight at all, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, really fun. Like obviously, like a super fun fighter, but action fighter to me. I think he's as good as Luque or Bahia. Yeah. So I'm putting him below all those guys. Action.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing is I also don't think he beat Konchenko. If he actually beat Konchenko, I would have been a little bit higher on him.
I don't really remember that fight.
He 100% lost.
Fights, but
that was a horrible decision.
Was it okay?
Awful.
Okay, well, discount.
Yeah, so we can move on. Glover Teixeira.
Yeah.
I would say
we love Glover in these fights.
I'm pretty close.
He's a nice, friendly guy. He's a good light heavyweight, well-rounded light heavyweight, more than most.
Yeah.
But really bad division.
Yeah, that is just definition of great but lucky.
Yeah, just super lucky. Yeah, great but lucky. Not nearly as good as someone like Marlon to me, even though he has traits that Marlon doesn't have that are really useful, like being really hard to kill and stuff like that. But
not as good at stuff.
Just slow, very easy to get reacting and leading him onto punches. Did not have an ability to wrestle actually good wrestlers. Yeah. Guys like
Corey
Anderson. Yeah, Corey Anderson. I was trying to remember his name. I can only remember his nickname because it's a good nickname. Corey Anderson just completely had no trouble with him at all. Stuffed every takedown, jabbed him up, right? But he does a good job against Jan Blachowicz, who's a good kickboxer for light heavyweight for sure.
Yeah.
And was able to take down and beat up guys who were at least like tough or athletic. Thiago Santos, guys like that. But lucky, super weak division in a pretty weak time, and against the best guys in that division, if they were around, like a John Jones, or like if Gustafsson didn't have his prime completely fall off, or even someone like competent like Hill, just was really able to not be troubled by him. So high floor, low ceiling, but a champion, a guy who has good wins. Great, lucky.
Yeah.
And I'm glad he got lucky. I like him a lot. I'm glad he had a lucky career.
Yeah, I mean, I think Glover's he's kind of the definition of a guy who was in position to take advantage of a lot of luck. Because, like, at light heavyweight, it could have been literally anybody. Like, I mean that in the meanest possible way, right? Like, if John Jones left, Gustafsson old, Rumble, ripped to him, I guess, but Rumble gone. And there are a bunch of situations where, like, anyone in the division could have become that guy, the top dude. And for a second, it was kind of a revolving door, right? Like, Jan Blachowicz was sort of that guy who was this oldish dude who made the right improvements and got to the top. And then it was Glover, and then it was Yuri Prohaska, who kind of sucked but got that win. So it's just, to get to that position, you need to have certain things where even if you're in a spot where everyone in the division is lucky, only 2 or 3 guys were able to get there. And Glover Teixeira was one of them for a reason. So yeah, I agree. He was just this guy with insane, unimpeachable heart. And like, a great fighter. Not as great as great fighters in other divisions, but definitely a great fighter.
Yeah. We can move on to the next name.
Yeah, Douglas Silva de Andrade. Action fighter. Action fighter for sure.
Yeah, action fighter. It feels he just didn't have like a great
Yeah, I'd
shot
say above
against.
Zaleski. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you want to? Do you think you should go in front of Fajea or behind?
I think behind Fajeda.
Behind.
But
Yeah. Good fighter. I like a lot of his game. He has a little bit of the kind of Diego Lima Muay Thai style,
yeah,
front
he's like
kicky, body
John
kicky.
Lineker, but
Yeah,
less John Lineker-y.
yeah, and a good fighter gives some tough fights to some guys. Got completely walked over by greats like Peter Yan, but good fighter, solid fighter. Bantamweight, it's the floor is so high at bantamweight
Yeah,
for an
that's
action
definitely true.
fighter that yeah, I like his skill set a lot, but just he didn't really have. There's never a way I would have imagined him like beating a top 5 opponent, beating a top 10 opponent at
Yeah,
bantamweight. Really, not the ways like someone like Edson or Trinaldo or Maya did and
right,
could have. Right.
right.
Um,
Yeah,
we
I mean, I
can.
think. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think my position with DSDA, like a lot of it is just strengthened by the fact that he beat Cheeto at one point and just completely beat the shit out of him. Like that was not a close fight at all, which is actually super
Yeah.
cool because he got
Cheeto was like very young at the
yeah,
time. I think Cheeto came in surprisingly underexperienced and
yeah. I mean,
youthful.
that's definitely true, but also that was right after the Lineker loss, and he looked actually pretty sharp against John Lineker, which is surprising because like Lineker didn't hurt him too badly, and then DSDA came in and just wrecked him, like beat him up really badly. So it's a weird win. It's kind of like a Michael Johnson situation, just really bizarre. But
Yeah.
because he got fraud checked just so insanely hard by Rob Font, like that's what I'm like. It is so
Yeah.
cool. And then he
Yeah.
got fraud checked by Peter Yan right after Cheeto Vera. So like I don't know who did it harder. Both of them kind of owned him really badly.
Yeah.
But then in the middle, there's just this shining performance against Cheeto Vera. And, I think he's just the definition of an action fighter, right? Like, I thought he beat Said Nurmagomedov. He beat the
That was a
crap out
close
of,
fight.
yeah, he beat the crap out of that other guy. Who was it? The one who beat Paiva. What's his name?
Uh, Hi.
Sergey Morozov.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There you go. I was about to say I hate that guy. I realized I shouldn't say that.
Well, I do.
He's
So,
fine. I'm sure he's a normal, nice person.
yeah. But yeah, he's really fun. Bantamweight, you're not going to be an action fighter without being good, as you said. But yeah, it's just the Cheeto win is probably a little bit more than he deserved. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Okay, so we can move on to one of the greatest, coolest,
Of course.
best
Yeah.
fighters of all time great career.
Yeah. I think RDA ends up right underneath Aldo. I think he stays there. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. When I kind of, we don't want to do too much spoilers, but when I looked at this, Rafael dos Anjos right under Aldo. You can talk about him all day. Just great career wins at different divisions. Should have been a champion at 2 divisions. He should have had the interim belt against Colby. I rewatched it recently just to like double check my axioms on that. And yes, he did beat Colby Covington. He has so many good wins. He has matchups that were definitely tough for him. He has some wins where you wish he looked a little bit, more competitive. The Ferguson fight isn't uncompetitive, but you're like, oh man, you should have given Ferguson a little bit more work than you did, even though that wasn't a comfortable weight class for him at the time.
Yeah.
And then like beating the crap out of Moicano at his age. Moicano's a good fighter.
Absurd. Yeah.
He has a lot, Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee was a good fighter. Even
Definitely.
if, Kevin Lee had an ability to mess up matchups more than
and
most fighters in history.
That was a fight that Kevin Lee, I don't think he messed that up at all. I thought he fought that fight perfectly.
Yeah, it wasn't like some of his other fights.
Yeah.
Where he
like there's the Al fight where Kevin Lee just shows up looking like a moron, but against RDA, he fought the best fight he possibly could have, which is what makes that so impressive. But yeah, I think RDA is kind of a situation where if he were less of a badass, you'd get a lot more credit for him. He would just be he would get so much more credit because he wouldn't have, hunted bad matchups at welterweight and taken Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman.
And
he would have
just
yeah, I mean Leon Edwards.
Insane run. He goes.
He just fought every good welterweight.
He's just like, what the fuck? That's like, yeah.
He fought every good welterweight. He gave Usman a better fight than Woodley did. He gave Leon a better fight than almost anyone. He gave Colby a better fight than
way better
anyone.
Fight than Bilal gave Leon, right?
Oh, 100%.
Bilal just got completely, for 5
smoked.
minutes, just worked. So, yeah, he would be a great just as like a welterweight probably. He wouldn't be GOAT tier, but he would be great.
Yeah.
He would be a great but unlucky welterweight. And then he also has a championship pedigree career at lightweight. So
Yeah.
you're like, okay, so this guy's obviously the second best Brazilian
Yeah.
ever.
I mean, I think
It's
yeah.
there's a this is a bit nerdy. There's a Bill James who's like a writer talking about baseball, talking about Ricky Henderson. And he says Ricky Henderson was so great you could split his career in two and you would have two Hall of Famers. That's how I
Right.
feel about Jose Aldo, obviously, but also Rafael dos Anjos. Rafael dos Anjos
Yeah.
has kind of like two awesome careers,
Yeah.
which
I
is
mean,
just, yeah, he's amazing.
yeah, I think the thing with RDA, even in comparison to Aldo, is that like I don't think you're gonna find a fighter who's more offensively versatile, and you don't even have to compare him to Brazilians. Just compare him to anybody in the sport.
It's hard, right? He's
Yeah,
one of the most, yeah,
it's
for
just
sure.
like, and even when it comes to like late career renaissances, right? Like you look at the Lawler fight, that's a different fighter to the one who fought Anthony Pettis, and that's a weight class up years later. And even then, I think he started in like 04 and that fight was in 17. So like 13, 14 years into his career, learning completely new things. Dude is just a madman. He's just one of the best fighters ever, one of the greatest fighters ever, perhaps the ballsiest fighter to ever live. Period.
Yeah, he has a rough early career, which if you care about that, I guess, people might
Yeah.
have a problem with it being so. I do not care about guys who weren't very good and took a lot of losses before. I care about when you were good. How good
Right.
were you? Right? That's what I care about. So that run at lightweight, the post lightweight championship career, the welterweight career, coming back down to lightweight, getting a good win, tons of longevity, only fought really like tough matchups for years and years. He's waned just a little bit now into like the Barberena class, right?
Yeah, I mean,
But
even Fiziev, like he has looked really old since Chiesa at least. Giving
yeah,
Fiziev a fight that hard is crazy because Fiziev is like that. That's a legit contender,
yeah.
and a
And his
horrible matchup.
losses at lightweight were not, or his losses in his prime at lightweight were not easy matchups at all. They were hard matchups. Eddie Alvarez is a hard fighter for Rafael dos Anjos. Tony Ferguson in his prime, not a layup in any area, just
Right.
because of how dangerous and active and awesome Tony Ferguson was at that time.
Yeah.
So just
RDA pretty much only got lined up for one layup in his entire career, and it was Conor McGregor. So an unlucky goat.
people are gonna be mad about that one. Okay, we can move on. We can talk about my maybe favorite
Oh,
fighter
let's
of all
go.
time. Okay, so
Charles Oliveira.
okay. So I'm gonna put Charles. I'll just say where I'm putting him, and I'm not gonna
Yeah,
let you argue with me.
that's
Oops.
fair.
He's there. To me, he's there.
Very
To me,
good.
he's the third best Brazilian of all time. He has an insanely long career. He has pretty much all the accolades in terms of like the finish record, submission record, performance. He would be the greatest action fighter of all time if he weren't a UFC champion who defended the belt, right?
Right.
Easily, like he would be the definition of the good, but he was like slightly too good to do that.
Right.
And a guy who obviously had flaws, had really rough patches in his career, never looked like this kind of like the way RDA looked, where
Right.
it was like, how do you beat this guy? He's so perfect everywhere. But one of the greatest offensive fighters of all time to me,
Of
in terms of
course.
just
Yeah.
how dangerous he is at like any stage and phase of a fight, kickboxing range. He's not a bad boxer at all. Awesome clinch, great, threatening of submissions all the time. It was very hard for guys to you had to knock him down and get on top of him and submit him for him
Right.
not to trouble you from bottom. Like good fighters like Kevin Lee, he was like, oh no, I'm gonna like wrap up your leg.
Right.
You're not gonna be able to, like, it's gonna be hard for you to get on top of me and land good stuff when he was at his best, right?
Yeah.
He has a really rough featherweight career where he looks like he has a hard stuck ceiling that he is able to push past in one of the most impressive, Lawler-esque career improvement renaissances we've ever seen.
Yeah.
And just has great wins over great fighters. Poirier is obviously the best win of his career, and not an easy fight for him, but he still manages to get a finish in it. He finishes Justin Gaethje, which is a fight that looks a bit harder than it actually was, just because of
Right.
how much he went into the fire when he didn't have to. Without getting into a firefight, he's basically is instantly piecing Gaethje up in that
Pretty
fight.
much.
It's a way harder. He is a lot better than Justin Gaethje. That fight makes it look like they're not too far apart. He is way, way better than Justin Gaethje.
Definitely.
And Justin Gaethje is a good fighter, even though he has problems. He's way better. So he's a guy who at his best is like so clearly a top 3 in a great division, and was a literal champion in it and was able to defend. And so he's not even just like a top 5. He's like a top 3, a top 2, one of those guys, right? In a in a really, really strong division. He's not this RDA. He's not Aldo, but to me, this is like he's one of the great Brazilians. He's in the GOAT tier, and he's better just as like an all-round fighter than the guys behind him, the 2 guys behind him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I definitely agree with where he's put. I think there's definitely a case in terms of his legacy that he did get a little bit lucky just because of the timing of the Khabib stuff.
Yeah, no, I think he definitely, if there was like a GOAT but lucky, you could put him there.
Exactly. Exactly. Like he is good. I think a bunch of the GOAT tier guys, like it's hard to get there without being a little bit lucky. It's these top 2 guys and nobody else who are just completely immune to matchups. And Charles Oliveira not immune to matchups, but if you gave him a good matchup, he would just wreck them. He would destroy them, and he was just one of the coolest fighters in the history of the sport.
Yeah, and it's not like a matchup was like a death sentence to him. Like a Kevin Lee, you know, a really insanely strong top player, a good, I think he might be a black belt, but a good, you know,
a good grappler for sure.
You know, with a submission threat, and a guy who didn't have like, you know, he wasn't a nothing burger on the in striking, and he was like, oh, I'm gonna come at this guy. I know how to attack Kevin Lee. I know how to, you know, get all my attritional work going. I know how to keep moving him backwards. He's big and strong. He might take me down. I can survive there, right? So even against a matchup that looks like a little bit, you know, troubling and was a little bit troubling, he says like, I still have ways through this, which is really, which is what you need, which is rare in MMA, where matchups determine so much, for a guy to really find a clear path through something tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can even look at it the other way, right? Like if you look at Oliveira's style, the guy who's supposed to trouble him the most are these, you know, big pocket bomber types who attack him being really upright all the time and weak in the pocket. And he beat 3 of those guys in a row by finish. Like those are
I totally forgot about Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler probably has you could argue, I would still argue Poirier, but you could probably come up with an argument if you're a Michael Chandler fan that that's his best win in terms of how much of a challenge it is for his style.
Right.
Because Michael Chandler did have a good ability to escape out of those submissions, you know, is a better grappler than Dustin Poirier, or at least a smarter grappler in fight than Dustin Poirier is.
Right.
And very strong and super explosive. And Henry Hooft gave him the right game plan for how to deal with the Charles Oliveira. But he was like, he had the pocket boxing, he had the technical skill to get through that fight, where he was like, okay, I have more depth than you in this area. I can push you a little bit. I can get you a little bit uncomfortable. And I only need like one great shot because I'm such a fantastic finisher. One of the greatest finishing sequences of all time against Michael Chandler. Just absurd shot placement and variety and aggression. So
it's crazy because like 5 of those shots miss and you can still see exactly what he's going for and how good it is.
Yeah, there's 2 cross counters against a guy who isn't really fighting back, which is like, I don't even know how you're managing that. The clinch, he does those knee, the elbow, falling along the cage with the left hooks.
Yeah, I mean, I think for all we said that he's not really all that much like RDA, you can really see some similar stuff in terms of how much he's good everywhere offensively in a way that you don't really see. Maybe at long range he's not that amazing, but you know he has the kicking game to stay dangerous.
Yeah,
the front kick he used against Poirier.
He's kick reliant, but I always am going to favor a guy who's kick reliant at range because MMA fighters aren't good at dealing with kicks. Right. So, yeah.
It's like he built a skill set in a really smart way, but with the kicky clinchiness against pocket boxers, and he was not a bad pocket boxer at all. Like defensively, very sus, but you know that's fine. Everyone has their problems. And
became really, which helped with his style, right?
Yeah.
That it helped complete it. That he became a very tough, you know, really just steel nerves fighter.
Exactly.
Late in his career. It helped with his career. Important is not over. He still has the ability to get really good wins at lightweight. So I don't think he'll pass RDA. I think it's a little bit unlikely, but I think there's a chance in there if he, you know, beats a Poirier rematch or and a Fiziev and a Dariush. Like if he beats those 3 guys, I think you can have a conversation about him and RDA.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Yeah, like that's the thing is Dariush, like if he beats Dariush, I'd be incredibly impressed just because, you know, obviously I rate Dariush much higher than
and
most
it's not
people.
it's
But
not a super easy matchup. It's
yeah,
probably
exactly.
an unfavorable matchup if you had to say anything.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the funny thing is if you look at the two guys above him and maybe the guy in the tier right below him, Sun Sao, like these are guys with just ice in their veins who control a fight from start to finish. And Oliveira just approached it from the complete opposite direction and ended up pretty much as good as all of them, if not better. I mean, you know, like you could really argue he was better than Sun Sao. You can argue he could have beaten RDA in his prime in a certain universe. Like I don't know how that fight goes, but
It would be
that's a close fight.
that's like that's a magical like
Yeah, that's a dream
genie
matchup.
in a bottle like fight where it's you wish for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just like approaching it from the exact opposite direction and managing that it's super impressive. So yeah,
we can move on to Mr.
That's weird.
Israel's worst nightmare.
That is very weird. I would say, you know, it's really weird to call the current champion a solid contender.
I feel like I came down on the great but lucky and very, very lucky.
Yeah, that's what's getting me. It's like
I do have like more than I think a lot of people that that are in this space a respect for like the kickboxing pedigree of these guys. He's a very good kickboxer and a much better kickboxer than pretty much any MMA fighter ever, right? Like there's not a lot of kickboxers. Like if you look at the way he fought Israel Adesanya, who's himself a very, very good striker, there's not many strikers in MMA who could pull out kind of like such a consistent, smart, confident approach to that fight like a seasoned kickboxer could. Whereas like I'm comfortable standing, you know, a very short distance from you against the cage for a while and just waiting for my moment. And yeah, he gets tagged pretty bad in that fight. And yeah, it doesn't seem like he can grapple at all. I mean, we don't have like a superb amount of evidence for this. It seems like he got just this very easy path to the title. But when I look at Alex, I think great but lucky. He probably has a lot of holes in his game. But I do have a confidence that he is an awesome MMA striker. There's no like, oh, well, if he ran into Whitaker, he would look flustered with the MMA range or something. I think he would look fine as a striker, maybe not getting wrestled, but he would look fine as a striker against Whitaker. He would probably look very good. He just walked through Sean Strickland. He was like instantly knew how to treat that guy that seemingly most MMA fighters suck at dealing with Sean Strickland. So yeah, I want to say solid. It's weird again, right? Because champ, solid contender.
I think it's also funny because of all the guys that we've gone through, this is the first guy whose career is like meaningfully not over yet. All these guys are pretty much done. So we have the full sample.
I would be excited, super excited for a Whitaker matchup.
Yeah, for sure.
Like to see if he could stop a not great wrestler, but a competent one, right?
Yeah.
Where I'm pretty confident he couldn't stop a great wrestler. I'm pretty confident about that.
Yeah.
But maybe if we give him the chance, he can stop like just a guy who's good, like a Whitaker.
An Australian wrestler, someone who knows the concepts, but you know.
Maybe I should stop underrating Australian wrestlers. But anyways, so where do you think? Do you think top of solid contender or just the most lucky great? Maybe we've ever seen.
Yeah, I'd say since there's still a little bit more to see, I'd say bottom of great but lucky, just hopefully so this ages a little bit better.
Yeah, right. That's what I'm worried. I'm worried he's going to be like, wow, he's surprisingly really knows his stuff when he's defending against the cage or whatever, right? And you just like learn that he's actually more well-rounded than it seems.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think Whitaker's an interesting fight where like it could go either really well or really poorly. I'm really confident Whitaker's a better MMA fighter, but Pereira being really big and kind of a tricky
that's
matchup.
Another thing is he has like a big factor that I think small middleweights who even are really well-rounded they would struggle with a guy that powerful and huge. He is ginormous. It's crazy. He's so big in the Israel fight.
It's the sort of situation where like you could easily say, hey, if Pereira ran into like I don't fucking know who's a grappler. Like if you ran into Gerald Mearshart,
like if Brunson got him, if Brunson body locked him and got on.
I love the direction our minds went. You said Brunson, I said Gerald Mearshart. We're two peas in a pod.
If you don't know, those are Bantam's probably favorite not great middleweights of all time.
Yeah, I mean Gerald Mearshart is.
This is Gerald, mine's Brunson. But yeah, no.
You picked a better one.
If Brunson, Brunson very, very strong, hits super hard from top position, if a little bit like jankily.
Exactly.
You could maybe just give just a horrible pounding to Alex, but
Exactly.
maybe he just you get like the thing where Brunson almost gets
Get
finished by
bombed.
Till, but now it's by
Yeah.
someone who's good at striking, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's the thing is
Or
Pereira
the
like
Israel fight, like you get Alex just having the Israel fight, right? That type of thing.
yeah. It's a tricky spot for him. I think it's mostly just because he's not done yet, and
Yeah.
there's a very good chance he gets one of the best wins you could get in MMA and Robert Whittaker soon.
Yeah.
But
A guy who's pound for pound top 15 legitimately, right?
yeah, definitely.
Which is not something middleweights can usually get. They
Yeah,
can't
like
usually get over pound for pound, you know.
yeah, that's the
And he
thing.
might,
Is
I mean, he might
Izzy,
end up with two. He might have with Izzy and then you're like, oh well, I feel like pretty good putting him in, the bottom of GOAT tier or something like that, right? But for right
yeah,
now, it's more like he's very, very lucky to have avoided the tough matchups.
yeah, and also very lucky that the champion was a guy who. Well, I mean, even just in terms of the rise, right? Like he's lucky that he ended up with a contender fight purely because the champion was Adesanya. Like it would have taken a
Yeah,
lot more work to get to
yeah,
Strickland.
yeah, that too, right? Yeah, is that they wanted him fast tracked for the rivalry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think
Uh,
we can move on.
yeah, I
That
think a
that
bunch of
one's
these next guys are.
controversial, and I don't feel like super strong. People are gonna say like, "Well, he's more of a contender. He's not that skilled." And some people are gonna be like, "What? He's like one of the best two-sport athletes of all time. He's a
Yeah,
GOAT." And I'm gonna be like, "Well, I don't know. I don't have the strongest opinion on him."
we are doing the middle path fallacy today. But
Yes, centrist, enlightened.
yeah,
Okay, we
yeah,
can
I
move
think
on to
these next couple
Pantoja.
are going to be really quick, just
Yeah,
because not even a couple. These next like 6, 7, 8, 9, they're going to be pretty
yeah.
fast. So
We're getting faster because we've kind of gotten through a lot of the more debatable.
yeah, a lot of the ones we like more too. Like after we
Yeah,
got through Sun Style, it was always
yeah.
going to be
I
quick.
was always gonna spend. I don't know how long we spent. 10 minutes on Oliveira, just because I love him so
Yeah.
much.
All right. So Alexandre Pantoja, I would say definite solid contender.
Yeah, that's
Um,
where I'm at with him too.
yeah, very solid fighter.
Where where do you think he would go along this?
Ooh, I mean, he's old and a contender now, but a lot of it, I don't know. I feel like
Yeah.
below Barboza, probably below Trinaldo,
You
just
think
because.
below Ronaldo? I
No,
feel
above
like
Trinaldo, I meant.
yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like he's about the same as Barboza. I would say like that's the order, but I don't feel like they're too drastic of a.
Yeah.
And I know some people are lower on Pantoja just because he's not very smart, he's not very defensive,
Yeah.
and he doesn't have like a great striking game or an awesome grappling game, but he has the capacity to beat good fighters in a good division, um, and a well-rounded skill set,
Yeah.
and is very hard to just shut out.
Yeah.
Even like Figueiredo, who put a beating on him, still had to put like a really high pace because Pantoja wouldn't stop coming at him, right?
Right.
So I like Pantoja more than most probably. He actually is one of the Brazilians I really like. I
Right.
love all Brazilians, if you can't tell, or I love most from this. We're
Yeah.
big. That's why we
We
made
love
this.
Brazil.
Yeah, we love Brazil. We love all their fascist fighters. But Pantoja is one of my favorites, low key.
Yeah. I mean, I think
So maybe this
personally,
is a bit emotional pick here with
yeah.
the solid contender, but this is where I think he belongs.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's definitely a solid contender just because of where he is in flyweight right now, and beating Moreno twice.
Yeah,
Probably not a third time, unfortunately. I think he's probably a bit too old for that. But Moreno twice, Royval, Perez, those are all very good wins.
yeah,
I like Trinaldo's game tons more than Pantoja's. I have to say that just because he's above him. I think Trinaldo is just a straight up better fighter. But in terms of what they've been able to show, it's a lot trickier to put Trinaldo above just because, Trinaldo, he was in a better division, but B, he has a lot more weird losses where Pantoja's lost to Figueiredo and I guess Askarov was a weird loss, but also
yeah. I
you could argue he
forgot he's
didn't lose
moving
it.
down to Gracie. No, that fight is like I hate when guys lose to Ascar.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
no, but
yeah,
yeah, it's just I think he's in a spot in the division where, like, yeah, occasionally you can be like he's not a great fighter if you look at him, but he's a very good fighter, and he's got a lot to show for it in the division with the Moreno wins, especially. I think he's a very I think there's a lot to say about how he approached Alex Perez, just because Perez easily could have been a much harder fight than it was.
yeah.
And off the layoff, Pantoja was just like, okay,
Same
fuck
with
you.
Roy to be honest, too, where he was just like, well, I just should grapple this guy, right?
Yeah, like he tried that the whole time, and yeah, like if anything, kind of low rolled the Royval fight that it took so long for it to end up on a rear naked choke.
Yes, that is true. It's you kind of expect for Royval to get out of there quicker against a guy who can actually take someone's back and submit them.
I mean, it feels
but
like a fight that
he still
Royval
got
wins.
to that point.
Yeah, like it weirdly feels like a fight that Royval wins most of the time after nearly losing all of the time. So I don't know. It's tough to say.
He has the win over the like really strong win over Manel Cape, who looks more capable than that fight showed.
He looks capable.
Yeah, he looks like a fine flyweight, right? So and Pantoja made it look like, oh, maybe this guy, fraud
maybe
check,
Rison's
right?
just bad.
Yeah, like it looked like a fraud check fight, and then it turned out, oh no, Cape's actually, he's okay. He's not so bad. He can do some nice things.
Right.
So yeah, I like that win. That's a good win to me. Yeah,
So,
Hayes, he knocks him out, but Hayes kind of was old and bad.
Yeah, Hayes was not good at that time.
Moreno, really young when he beats Moreno, but he does it in a way that's pretty like consistent to his style and to Moreno's, to be honest.
He out lead hands Moreno, which is actually like I feel like Moreno's boxing is getting a bit overrated, but he's still a very good boxer. And Pantoja's game is not supposed to be striking at all. He's supposed to be grappling men. So it's pretty impressive to do that.
Okay. Well, I think we can move on to the next name.
Yeah. Paulo Costa, I'd say.
Yeah, I would say solid. I would say solid contender. And I would probably put him around the like Pantoja. I know you're going to be so mad that we're putting a guy as annoying and weird as Paulo Costa.
I think it's fair. It's just Trinaldo's such a weird spot, right? I don't want to circle back to guys we've already done, but since we're putting so many guys above him,
well, it's just that we can talk a little bit about it.
Yeah. Right? It's just because like Paulo Costa, he has so much more to show in the division as a top contender. He has the Romero win, he has the Rockhold win, and he got kind of lucky with those, but it's hard to put.
He did beat Vittori too.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Even though he gets robbed a little bit, right?
Yeah, I thought I gave it to Costa, but the optics.
And also he like cheated him out of fighting at the proper weight class, so you kind of have to take a point for that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not going to complain too much about that, but it's just like with how hard he got owned by Izzy, I don't think Trinaldo would get owned that badly by anybody. But
I mean, Trinaldo did get kind of. He didn't have. It's not like Trinaldo never had fights where he looked a level below.
That's true.
Guys. He did have fights where guys were like, okay, this guy's probably.
I think it's just like the weird distinction between like we have a great but unlucky and a great but lucky. We don't have like contender but lucky and contender but unlucky. And I don't think we should, because that'd be silly and stupid. But that's where this sort of falls apart, because Costa is the definition of contender but lucky. He's a very good fighter, but in a weird spot when it comes to his skill set. He's kind of like there was this kickboxer who was only good when the guy was against the ropes and gets clowned anytime someone isn't against the ropes. Who was it? Was it Igawa? I feel like it was Igawa.
Maybe. I'm trying to.
I think Ryan wrote an article about him, and I was like, this fight's super weird because he just got like teeth kicked around anytime he was in the open, but when the guy was against the ropes, he was just an absolute monster. So that's how I kind of feel about Costa. Not as good as an actual kickboxer, obviously, but solid, well-constructed skill set for middleweight, but weird.
And just a way weaker resume than you would want for Costa, right? Yeah. Where it's like, oh, nice, Gareth McClellan. Olawale Bangbos, like these are not
very cool.
These are not like good wins at all. Johnny Hendricks not a good win at all.
It's pretty much just him being a bad matchup for Romero and Rockhold being old.
And Uriah Hall, him punching Uriah Hall in the penis.
And getting jabbed up so badly. That's the fight that convinced people Uriah Hall was like a good boxer now.
Yeah, that Uriah Hall fight is not a good look for him, because he cheats so much in that fight, like a ridiculous amount of cheating. And he wins it. And he does look better than Uriah Hall. But he also gets dropped by Uriah Hall.
Yeah, he gets cross-countered.
Uriah Hall is moving laterally on him, and like actually it's being successful. Like he can't pin down Uriah Hall. And I mean, Uriah Hall, he gave like an okay fight to Robert Whittaker back in the day and stuff like that. He's not a bad fighter. I hate when people talk about Uriah Hall like he's a bad fighter, because he isn't a bad fighter.
He's mid.
And he was like beat up Shoeface. That's like he showed the ability to be like, oh yeah, I can put it on guys. And it's not like he was always a flake and always fucking up an easy matchup and
Yeah,
stuff.
I mean,
like
if you're
that.
being always a flake is just being bad, he was just a flake.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. But Costa it's really just the prime Romero
Right.
battle, right?
And a lot of people gave that to Romero. I didn't really see a great argument for it. But I think a lot of it's just that, Costa was too durable and too good at attacking southpaws for Romero to beat, more than being better than
really
Romero.
fast. Just a kind of a huge frame that made Romero a little less confident. I feel Romero is he is questioning himself a little bit in front of this equally giant muscled man.
Exactly.
This is the first time in his life he's met someone who is as huge as he is.
Right.
So yeah, the resume is low, but if you remember when we talked about Trinaldo, I also said the resume was a little bit, low on Trinaldo as well.
Yeah, I think that's
Trinaldo better resume. You know what? I'm fine. I'll just do it. I think Trinaldo's probably a little bit better. I'll humor you. I think Trinaldo probably just beat more guys who are okay. I think.
Yeah.
I just don't know if Paulo Costa has beaten 5 okay guys in his whole career.
He hasn't. I
just don't think he has 5 okay wins. So
man, honestly, the Rockhold fight made me
think he has. Yeah, I think he has that Vettori fight where it's Vettori's a good fighter, and the Yoel fight is a very, very high peak, much higher than Trinaldo, Pantoja, Edson, right? Alves, probably maybe even Maia too, right? That's such a good, but
it's just so out of character.
I'm not convinced by it.
Yeah.
I was never convinced by Paul. I was pretty convinced Adesanya was going to own him, and he did.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people thought that fight was competitive going in, and I was not convinced it was at all. I was no, Israel's just going to move around. He's just going to do what Uriah Hall did, but if Uriah Hall was good.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was I started out thinking Paulo Costa was just the absolute pits. I was okay, this guy's just he's never beaten anyone remotely good or even approaching good. And then he beat Romero, and I was yeah, okay, this guy's scary as hell. I'm scared of this guy. And then he went into the Izzy fight like a complete moron, a big frothing idiot.
And he was made to look like a little baby.
Exactly. So I've kind of reverted to the mean on him. He's mid. And I think he has less good wins than Trinaldo, more to show for it in the division. I could go either way on that. I wasn't even.
I didn't even really talk about the Luke Rockhold win because
it wasn't a win. In fives. I mean, Rockhold out-fived him so hard.
Yeah, and Rockhold was old, and he was there's all these mental things going into the fight he was dealing with. There was and he was coming back from this long kind of emotional layoff, and him and Hooft were treating it like a swan song, type of thing. It wasn't it was he was supposed to put on a good fight against a guy who was there to survive and do cool stuff and then retire. And that's what the fight was. It's weird to talk about a MMA fight like that, but I almost don't treat it like a real fight.
Yeah, it's Rockhold was driven purely by rage. And I respect that so much. If Rockhold were on this tier list, he would be above GOAT tier for that performance alone. But
okay, we can move on to a fighter we like way more.
Yeah, Hani Barcelos. I mean, I think I'd have to rate him lower, to be honest, after that Umar fight.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I like more did not mean that we rate him higher. I think my idea right now is here. That was
that's very fair.
I think definitely one of the 15 best bantamweights for a kind of surprisingly, sadly short amount of time.
Yeah.
And he just came in so old.
Yeah, it's another situation.
Really had a super great athletic skill set, but a really awesome game, a really complete game. For a guy who's that old and in that spot in the division.
If we had a contender but unlucky, I think he'd be the definition of it for several reasons, right? Because he was a top 15-ish talent for a while. B, ran into Victor Henry, who nobody knew in his debut in the UFC, and that's that's an all-time great fight. No one acknowledges that fight when it comes to fight of the year 2022. I think it was up there very clearly. That fight was fantastic. He had the canceled Assunção fight. He had the canceled Merab fight, both of which were winnable. Assunção especially.
Yeah, he also had some really easy ones
Stamen.
Rojo and Marcelo Rojo.
Marcelo Rojo was one.
Which is he would have picked up easy wins.
Yeah. And there was the robbery against Timur Valiev, which that's another spot of bad luck.
Bad decision there. Yeah. And I don't rate Timur Valiev at all, actually. So I don't rate it as much of a win, but I also don't count it as him losing to someone.
Yeah, I mean, I
think he won that fight.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Valiev looked solid in that fight, and he fought a really good fight. But like Trinaldo very clearly won that, and it's horrifying that they didn't give him the decision. But yeah, I think action fighter is fair for him. Like especially with that Umar loss, he's not getting where we all thought he was going to be just because he's too old.
Yeah, and I think his ceiling athletically, he looks fast in fights, and he doesn't look like he's not a puncher. But I think for a bantamweight with like what the athletic standard of bantamweight is, he actually probably does have a low ceiling for getting into like even like someone like Jimmy Rivera would probably be really fast.
Yeah, I think the cardio also probably a problem with the Victor Henry fight, especially in 5 rounders.
Oh, definitely with cardio too. Yeah.
It's. I think he was like he's a really.
It would have been hard for him to be a consistent top 15 guy, I think, or sorry, a consistent top 10 guy. And he probably would have floated in the 15, which is kind of what these guys above him are. So I consider him in the same tier as like CDF.
I mean, I think CDF had a better run, but
CDF definitely above him, but I think skill-wise as fighters,
he's up there.
I would be fine with saying they're like around the same skill level, with Luque being, a little bit higher.
Yeah. But yeah, we can move on.
Yeah.
Matthews Nicolau, I'd say okay for now. Oh, actually no, he's what is he now? He's like number 6, right?
He's way higher than you would think. I'll double check.
I like his game. He's like a classic right-hand countery old Brazilian, but without the a lot of the nuance. But he doesn't really need it. Really weird, kind of poor ring craft, but it he backs himself up to the fence way more than he should. But he's good enough on the counter to bail him out. I'm not really super inspired by him, but he's solid. I think he's fine.
Yeah, I'm not a huge. He's number 5 at flyweight, which is kind of insane. I don't really rate Matt Schnell too highly.
Yeah.
I don't.
Even though
I did give some props to Cape earlier. Cape did not look good in that fight, and it's like split decision.
I think Cape beat him. Yeah.
Yeah. Dustin Ortiz just kind of dealt with him, even though I think he was pretty young in that fight. I kind of want to put him into okay right now. I just it shows how weak flyweight is that the 5th best one is kind of okay.
I'm cool with that
because I'm not even sure I don't think he's like actually better than someone like DSD. I think maybe like Zaleski prime.
But I mean also
he's picking up more wins these days, right, against guys who are Tim Elliott's like respectable fighters, right?
I mean, I guess the way I see it is okay isn't really subordinate to action fighter, so I'm cool with him being the only okay guy now.
Well,
there's another okay guy coming up.
Thiago Moises, I would say, is like a little bit better than him, maybe.
I'm not sure. Better division for sure, but yeah, I'm okay with either order for that. I think like Nicolau has the potential to surprise us. He has a decent game, but he's fine for now. I think it's another situation where we haven't seen all of him. But yeah, Thiago Moises, I think we kind of have seen all of them, owned by pretty much every really great fighter we've seen him against. But
or even like
solid
quality, like even every fighter who has like a little bit to them, like he feels like a fighter with no juice who can beat fighters who also don't really have any juice to their game. And by juice I just mean like they have like something they can surprise and be dynamic with.
The real exceptions to that are Michael Johnson and Bobby Green, but Michael Johnson, you just kind of have to exist on one of his bad days to beat him, and Bobby Green, you just kind of have to get to the scorecards to have like a 50-50 shot at beating him. So it's weird.
Yeah, and he's like he loses to Demir, Beneil, like good fighters who didn't make it look competitive.
Yeah, right? Beneil and Islam crushed him. So
and Demir also didn't have any trouble with him. And then it's like the wins, Kurt Holleba, Michael Johnson. I mean, literally almost a 500 fighter. I love Michael Johnson, but he does not count as like
just a top tier boy, but that's not.
Not like, oh wow, big, stamp that as a great win.
Yeah.
Bobby Green, I like. Hernandez, not really.
Hernandez sucks.
It's just he's not like a guy who ever found his place in the UFC or at lightweight for me to be like.
Yeah, I did enjoy how hard he big dicked Hernandez. Like that was a good performance.
Yeah,
but
better than Trinaldo did, to be honest.
That's also true, but also doesn't have the wins.
Yeah, doesn't have the wins, and I feel like now because he is he's not like old or anything. Yeah, he's only 27. Probably one of the guys who has the most, like, a good chance to move up into
Yeah.
like the low level solid contender range. I can see him picking up, you know, a Jalen Turner one day, or
Yeah.
you know, stuff like that. Maybe not Jalen Turner, but like, you know,
Yeah, I
guys
don't.
who don't have very well rounded games in that, you know, mid, you know, what's like something Grant or Dustin, or I can't remember who's that white
Oh,
guy,
Grant Dawson. Grant
Grant
Dawson.
Dawson,
He
the most
sucks.
white guy
Yeah,
name ever. I
he's
could
mid.
not guess it.
But
Just like
yeah,
guys like that who also
yeah,
don't really have like juice to their game at all. Where
yeah.
it's
I
like
think it's just
he's going to be a little bit better than those guys. He can pick up wins over those guys.
yeah.
So if you look in this list and Moises, you're like, he was a solid contender. I'm not like super
This was
surprised
probably
that he
before
got up
that.
there.
Yeah,
If you're watching this 4 years from now and you're like, yeah, he picked up wins throughout lightweight for 4 years, 5 years, I'm not so totally surprised because he's not bad.
yeah.
Um,
He's
and he's not
like
an action fighter, so he doesn't really belong in the action fighter range. He doesn't put on
yeah,
action fights, so he's
like
okay. Yeah.
yeah. Like I mentioned earlier, that lightweight is kind of a division where guys like they're either on one side of the meta in terms of striker, grappler, or the other, and I think we are seeing that. So you know, he'd get owned by guys who can grapple. That tends to be how it's went so far. Because
Yeah.
he's not a great striker, he's like a fine-ish striker, but you know he gets easily wrestled because he doesn't know how to knock back. He's like, you know, the way I thought about Thiago Moises in the Islam fight specifically was like he's like if Dustin Poirier had none of the good parts of Dustin Poirier's game, where he backs up to the fence really easily and waits for counters, and he pulls guillotines anytime you shoot on him, and he gets squished on the bottom. He's just the worst of ATT, but he's
Yeah.
also like he has the good parts of the basic ATT mold, which is like decent counter punching, so you know, wall walking, all that stuff. So yeah, he's fine. He can get better at some stuff and do better just because of the makeup of lightweight. But yeah, he's okay. Definition of okay. Yeah, we can move on. We're sort of getting into the tier of guys who I don't care enough about to say a ton about, if that makes sense.
It's a bit of the older tier. It's a bit of
Yeah,
the guys who have been past it for a while, and
yeah,
guys who are fighters I liked, but not people who really like inspire a great amount of
conversation.
yeah. Machida, I thought that kind of this mid-pack great but
Yeah,
lucky is where I have him.
yeah,
I think putting him ahead of Glover is actually fine though.
yeah. I think
I don't think he's. I think there's actually probably a gap between Moraes, which people might think
yeah,
is crazy because Machida was a
there
UFC
for way longer.
champion
Yeah,
and there for way longer, UFC champion, and you know had like a really iconic kind of Machida era,
yeah, and
right?
several knockouts that
With
were
air
really
quotes, right?
yeah,
But didn't beat, I don't really think, Shogun the first time around, and then
yeah,
Shogun proved it by knocking him
yeah,
out. He has a split decision with Rampage Jackson in like this. This is his light heavyweight run. I'm just kind of going through like the
yeah.
best wins, right? And it's not awesome. He doesn't beat, and then it's like Randy Couture front kick. Like I don't really care about you being Randy Couture, and then you know makes John Jones look beatable,
Yeah,
which was
he's
like
one of
one
John Jones's better
of
wins for sure.
so looking good against John Jones, being a natural middleweight before you know
He
getting
started doing that with every natural middleweight.
yeah is more impressive because Shogun didn't look competitive
Right.
with John
Yeah.
Jones and
Hey,
Chael
Shogun
Sonnen
also
didn't,
old at the time, but
you
yeah.
know, Shogun didn't, Chael Sonnen didn't. A lot of these middleweights never looked competitive with John Jones, and he gave John Jones some problems. So I'm saying he's better than, you know,
Yeah.
um, he's not horrible. And then you go into his middleweight career, which is I think much more interesting and better.
Right.
Mark Munoz, Gegard Mousasi. He totally owns Gegard
He
Mousasi.
destroys
That's a
Musashi.
great fight.
Yeah.
It is not close. He is better than
He
Gegard
just
Mousasi
he double
by
attacks
a
the
lot.
crap out of him. It's so cool.
I think he's better than they didn't fight until much later, but I think he is better than that era of Vitor Belfort, even though
Yeah.
Vitor Belfort was such a powerful, scary kicker.
Yeah.
Then he just does a lot better against Chris Weidman. I think it's like an
Definitely.
interesting
He
point of
doesn't give up as
comparison.
easily.
Yeah.
Anywhere close. That's the big problem with Vitor, and we'll get to Vitor in a couple entries, I think. But
he owns CB Dalloway, who I don't really like care too much
Dalloway,
about CB Dalloway.
he
but
did Dalloway the way you should. Just body kick him in like 10 seconds.
And then he goes on the bad run, right? He gets, you know, it's Rockhold, Romero,
Weidman,
Brunson, who all just, you know, the Brunson win is not great because
that was like after 2 years off too. But
yeah, that is 2 years off. Yeah, it's like, and his career is pretty much like little UFC Bellator cross where he's winning. but they're not good wins. It's like old Chelsea.
And he nearly beats Musasi a second time, right?
Yeah, he body kicks the shit out of Musasi for like 2 rounds again. He does it. They basically have the first fight, and then he looks old in the later rounds and can't really do much. But for like the part and almost nothing happens. But for the part where things are happening, he is doing fine against Musasi at a very old age. He was just so much better than Musasi that he could still do it at like 41 or whatever he was in that fight.
For the most part, I think he's more interesting to look at like as a fighter than in terms of as a career. His career is plenty interesting, but I think he's a really interesting fighter. Lots of clever little distance trapping, the kind of guy who makes karate look a lot more actionable than it is in MMA, honestly. Like if you look at the guys who are karate fighters, it tends to be that the guys who can box while doing karate are a lot more interesting. Robert Whittaker, Kyoji Horiguchi, the guys like Machida, they're fine. The guys who can do like, the little stepping in reverse punch and nothing else when it comes to boxing, they're a lot less interesting. But Machida was really successful for a very long time just because he was a really hard, fairly clever kicker with some systems around it. And
not a guy who was easy to take down at any point, really. He kind of always had great hips, good instincts.
He had those the judo throws early in his career a bunch where he just murked people.
So I think he was a solid fighter.
Definitely.
In a way, like guys who had a good career at light heavyweight are almost never. And it's because he was a good middleweight secretly the whole time. But a great fighter.
Very good fighter.
I think very good fighter. Lucky because he didn't fight in like super good divisions ever. He won a championship in a division that was like historically weak, robbing Shogun, right?
Yeah.
So
But sometimes you just get that. I think Shogun. Honestly, it really depends on how much you
Shogun is hard because he is unlucky in the sense that he did have injury problems, and
his body was like 90 years old by the time he got to the UFC.
Yeah, and he was a big light heavyweight for a time. He had like there was a point in his career where he had like huge shoulders and arms and a big chest. He was never like shredded, but he was always kind of like this really thick built guy, big legs. But that was because he put on muscle to be a real light heavyweight like that. And I think he was always maybe like secretly a tweener, actually, more in like that like Rockhold size.
That makes sense.
So in like that way, you could say he's unlucky in that he never was like super meant for the divisions that exist in MMA. But he made it work, and it wasn't a super big detriment. So I don't feel totally unlucky there. And the injuries, his style didn't facilitate.
Yeah, classic shoot boxing.
His style didn't facilitate lasting long, and then
he lasted long anyway.
That's true. And then when his body fell apart, it made the style like worse. So it was an exacerbated thing. I'm really not sure. I feel like great, just kind of great is the place to put him. And do you think he belongs above Moraes, or do you think the wins are not there?
Yeah, I think he's below Moraes.
The Machida win is good. And he has good wins in Pride where he treats guys who were okay but not like awesome. He finishes Overeem, right? He knocks out Arona in like such an awesome sequence where he just kind of punches him between his legs. It's great. And a really innovative action fighter.
In terms of Pride rules, no one used them better than him. I think that's one big thing that people ignore about Shogun is like people think it's easy to soccer kick people whenever you want. It is not. It's just something that Shogun made look very easy because he had.
And
I think
Shogun's not always kicks. It was like these like flying stomps that were just great.
I think like what we said about RDA that he had 2 careers. I think that's kind of true of Shogun too, just at a much lower level because you had crazy wild man Shogun in Pride with no injury issues or fewer injury issues at the time.
Yeah, he did get injured against Coleman the first time. He gets it was a collarbone injury or something, and he loses to like a pretty old Coleman and has to redeem that win. He breaks his arm on like a takedown, I think was what. I think it's just like in terms of actual like body age, he wasn't too bad at that time. But near the end of Pride, I think like his last win, it was like who was it? His last Pride win. There was something really weird that he looked kind of bad. So by the time his last Pride win was when he just knocked out over him really easily.
Oh, yeah, like one of his later Pride wins.
But
Got-
it was his UFC debut, which is like really embarrassing, where he gets finished by Forrest Griffin in the third round. He like gasses out and
I was thinking about Nakamura.
Him.
Yeah,
oh,
by
you
the
were
time
thinking about the Nakamura fight is not good. It's not a good fight.
Even by Nakamura, he's starting to look a little bit weaker. So I think if you consider that, there's a really good case that he's a genuinely great fighter who just got really old by the time he got to, and I wouldn't say like Pride at that time was top tier competition. But by the time he fought people who people knew, like by this era, he was pretty old. The John Joneses, the Machitas, and beating Machida when he's old, that's a big credit. So
yeah, he has the Dan Henderson fight, which is a super
that's
action.
insane.
Yeah, and close, because whenever a fight has that much action, there's always like a point where it could have just swung and
exactly.
So Dan Henderson was a good fighter, especially at that time. Had kind of like had a nice mix of athleticism and skill development, where he wasn't so
one-dimensional with the right hand. Yeah.
And was still like mighty athletic and mighty durable. And I think if he was around in the UFC middleweight division, he would probably look awesome, or light heavyweight division at the time.
Definitely.
He would probably look awesome against like the Chuck Liddells and Rampages who were around then, where he literally did beat those guys.
I mean, even at good divisions, I feel like people with Shogun's brain, even without if they were better than Shogun, but they had Shogun's knack for adjusting through the years, they do a lot better. Becoming I've said this multiple times. I said it with Figueiredo and I said it with Aldo. It's really, really hard to go from super aggressive dude to patient counterpuncher exactly when the time demands it. It's hard to stay that. And Shogun did it longer than anybody, even if the competition wasn't good, right? He did it for longer than anybody. People now just know him as the counterpuncher. You have to hear of Shogun legend to know him as that aggressive, crazy dude, which is wild.
And it's hard for people to understand how iconic that 2005 tournament.
Yeah, exactly. The Pride Shockwave. Yeah.
That was a stacked tournament, and he went through it and knocked guys out, and it is an awesome tournament to watch of him going through there, just KOing dudes. So this is where I think Shogun belongs.
I think that's the right spot.
I think it was great, but a weak division, so a little lucky.
Next up,
Nog. I don't have a ton to say about him. If you just want to,
that's Little Nog, by the way. You'll see Big Nog later. He's light heavyweight, heavyweight-ish, so I'm fine with him and great but lucky. He was a champion. We're cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna put him. Where do you think?
I'd say below Glover. But
below Glover, I think Glover looks a bit better. Junior Dos Santos,
solid contender. Not champion for long. Yeah, sort of high rolled the Cain Velasquez.
High rolled the Cain Velasquez. Do you think he belongs with these Edson Alves Mayas?
Yeah, I'd say below Barboza.
Below Barboza? Yeah, I think that's fair, just because they both have a very similar issue.
But Barboza did it in a better division.
Yeah, both insanely tough. We should talk about
100%.
Same problem, crazy tough guys, right? I think that makes it almost look like it's worse than it is, because they survive on the back foot so long, getting beat up, that you're like, wow, these guys really suck on the back foot. Where if they just instantly died every time, Dos Santos did later in his career, you would be like, oh, maybe they just fall apart a little bit.
I mean, I think the thing with JDS also is that he didn't have Edson Barboza's penchant for just ruining guys when they were worse than him, but he did have a really nice system for boxing in a way heavyweights usually didn't.
And we should talk about his really good fight with Stipe Miocic.
Definitely,
high level.
Yeah, I mean, even that was early Stipe a bit, but it's kind of
high level for heavyweight though.
Definitely.
So I like JDS. I respect JDS, but just a bit too many problems, and he did get that championship, but not
sustainably.
Not a sustainable championship reign. Much closer to those one-off champions than he is to someone who is reigning. I think you could argue great but lucky. I think I
wouldn't.
You don't think he could be here? I think
he could, but also the fact that we put Barboza down there, it feels like it sort of shakes up the whole rankings.
I know, but because at least he had the ability to get to that kind of ceiling of just because of how powerful and fast he was.
I mean, that's also true. I feel like you could say that once you pass the great threshold, it's hard to get lower than that, if that makes sense. But like Edson Barboza, he could have high rolled a certain champion. Like if I don't know, could he have
if he just fought
Alvarez for sure.
Oh yeah, right, yeah, Eddie,
Yeah,
yeah, that's true. So okay, yeah, no, I agree. This will probably feel like a hipster take to a lot of people to put a champion
definitely.
in contender, to put a champion behind Maya Alves. But to me, these guys are guys who could have, Maya Alves, Barboza, they also could
Yeah,
have won one championship and
yeah,
then immediately been, dispatched by the guy who's actually better than them.
yeah. It's like a probability thing. JDS landed on the right side of it, which is
Yeah,
fine. Like you deserve credit for it, but yeah.
yeah. Do you think on resume maybe he should be?
I think it's possible, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah, because he has Verdum, who I don't know where you'd put Verdum. I'd put Verdum pretty high for heavyweight. So
yeah, I agree. And Verdum had this like peak that was really
yeah,
nice.
actually, I'm kind of reconsidering it now that I remember he beat Verdum. That
Yeah, I feel like
yeah,
here is a good spot for him.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I feel good about this.
Yeah, I forgot he beat Verdum completely before you mentioned the resume.
I'm actually gonna do this.
Yeah.
Come on. There we go. There we go. That's where I feel he should be.
Yeah.
He's definitely like a guy you remember for a long time for those KOs and stuff, right? He feels like he has that air of a memorable great Brazilian, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think
even
for
if
me it's
in a
also
weak division.
Yeah, for me it's also that like JDS and Cain Velasquez. So I got into MMA by just playing a bunch of computer games and video games, and those two are always the ones who show up as like the trial characters because they're the two top heavyweights.
Yeah.
So like JDS is the MMA fighter, but yeah.
My Burns
Gilbert Burns, top
argument. Can I make my great but unlucky argument for Gilbert Burns? I think he belongs here. That's where I think he belongs. I know this is going to be high for a lot of people, and we can argue. I'm not saying he has to stay here, but I'm just placeholder. Gilbert Burns, guy who lost to Dan Hooker at lightweight, got owned by Dan Hooker, right?
Yeah.
And then has a career reinvention at welterweight where he looks a lot healthier.
Right.
His speed, it becomes a big advantage once he comes to welterweight, in a way where it wasn't at lightweight. He doesn't lose a lot because he never was really a go-to grappling guy at lightweight anyways.
Right.
And it becomes more of like a defensive thing for him that he can get out of these wrestling situations. And he carries all his power up to welterweight.
Yeah.
And I think really has, an argument for having been the third best welterweight in the world for longer than people think he has. I think he did. So important thing to remember for this is I have a controversial opinion. I think he did beat Khamzat Chimaev, who was a good fighter.
The good fighter part is controversial to me.
Yeah, I think most people would agree with the good fighter part. Most people would disagree with the fight part. I think he did. Either way, it's a close fight, and he puts a hell of a beating on Chimaev.
Yeah.
He rocks Usman. He's like the first guy to do that in the UFC, pretty much. I'm trying to remember an earlier person who hurts him really bad. Completely owns Woodley in a way where I'm very confident he would have done it to Woodley in his prime.
100%.
Just like, oh, right hand counter, I'm just going to own you with kick, knee, I'm going to blitz. I'm going to own you. So he's better than Tyron Woodley. I think he is probably better than Colby Covington because he has power to hurt and because he is better than people think because he's such a wild man striking of knowing his spot in a fight. Right. He does it against Chimaev where he looks kind of like he's falling out of it. And then he's like, oh, I'm rearing back in. I know what to do now, right? And he starts hitting the body after Hoof yells at him, right? All this stuff, right? Good kicker, real not a bad boxer. He's relying on his power and his speed for sure there. And, got out of bottom position on Damian Maia super easily and like knocked him out. And even though it's old Maia could still grapple, obviously. So I think a really well-rounded fighter, a good skill set for welterweight, I think. This kind of like ability to avoid the grappling and to be really powerful and dangerous in all areas. I think he was great. I think Gilbert Burns is and was like a really good fighter who is solid top 5, if not 3 in his division. Yeah, but you can argue now where you think he should be.
Yeah, honestly, I don't have a ton to say that. I think Gilbert Burns, he's a very good fighter. He did Neil Magny exactly as badly as great
Right, that's
fighters
another
should.
thing is
Yeah, it's like
he has that Neil Magny check mark, which good welterweights should have, right?
exactly like if you're a fraud, you don't do Neil Magny that badly. You might still beat him like Ponzinibbio did, but you
Yeah.
don't crush him with no resistance whatsoever.
Yeah.
I think the thing with Gilbert Burns is, for me at least, he is a limited fighter in I think some really specific ways, but he's really really smart in a way that people don't tend to acknowledge. Because if you look at the fights like as an elite, right? You look at the Woodley fight. He came out, immediately draws out the right hand counter and kills him for it like 30 seconds in. Like draws it out with the jab feint.
Yeah,
Draws
right away.
it.
It's a
Overhand
great
counter. It's
first
over.
round. Yeah.
And against Usman, he does the same thing where he's like, yeah, Usman's a jabber. He wants to jab and shoot. I'm going to play the overhand off the uppercut as soon as I possibly can and scare him. And yeah, it didn't work, but you fight a good fight. It's not always going to work, but it's a good fight, right? You did the right stuff. And against Usman, a lot of guys aren't going to have what it takes to beat him outright. And Covington, he didn't fight nearly as good a fight. Usman just fought a shit fight. And
yeah, he also another thing to go to like this, I think his underrated intelligence is he like completely passes the Woodley intelligence test.
exactly.
He's like, oh, I know how I'm supposed to do this. And even though he's like super limited against someone like Woodley, where he's not a great shot takedown guy and he's not a great striker, he still is like, or sorry, not Woodley.
Against Wonder Boy.
Wonder Boy, yeah, he completely passes the Wonder Boy, intelligence test.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, he's not going to be able to like really keep, taking down and holding down and landing on Wonder Boy, which he wasn't able to.
Yeah.
And he's not able to just strike with Wonder Boy. But he knew exactly what Wonder Boy's limitations were in both areas to just like keep piling up score on him and win that decision. Even though it's not a favorable type of fight for him, and it is an intelligence test fight that guys like Luque, never was able to even get close to. So he's to me, he's so much clearer of an action fighter at this point. I resent the implication that he's an action fighter. I think the top of the solid contender, like the Maya, is where most people would argue he is. But I just think he's very smart. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's the kind of thing where even with Chimaev, right? I don't think I scored Chimaev for Burns, except in retrospect, because it turned out that Chimaev was an actual light heavyweight, and just this big fat dude fighting at welterweight for no reason. Just I hate him so much, man. And Gilbert's just a guy who fought at lightweight. By that, you get 4 extra points for that. I don't even care. So,
and he also totally chads on him in the last
exactly.
minute of the 3rd round. He just chases him around the cage, screaming at him and punching him, and you're like, oh, this is the sickest shit ever.
Yeah.
The last part of that fight is awesome.
The whole 2nd round too, Gilbert just beats the crap out of him.
I mean, people might disagree about this, but I don't care. He would have owned Chimaev in a 5-round fight.
Very possibly.
Because Chimaev did not have the ability to take a break and get his energy back. Where when Burns gets winded, like he did in that fight, he took time, he recovered, and then he had energy at the end of the fight.
I think the body work makes it a question.
Yeah, he's a fighter who's smart enough for 5 rounds, where I don't feel like Chimaev was in that fight, to be able to the ebb and flow of a 5-round fight. Gilbert Burns is smart enough to get.
I mean.
So I feel confident about those things. I feel confident he's better than Colby Covington. I feel confident that he puts up better fights against Usman and Leon than most of the division does.
Right.
And that's just I just appreciate his Ortega status as he's not close to as good as Holloway. He's not close to as good as Volkanovski. Yeah. But man, he's tough and he can do a lot of good things. And he has moments against those guys, right? Or he hasn't fought in Leon Edwards, but he has moments against Usman, like Ortega had moments against Volkanovski and Holloway, right? So,
I mean, for the most part, I think Burns
I think we can put him in the top of solid contender. If you think he's okay, you think he's okay above Maya? I know Maya has more of a resume. I just feel like Burns
he's a better fighter.
Better fighter. Yeah.
And honestly, I was fine with great but unlucky, but I'm cool with either one.
Yeah,
just because
it might be hot it might be too hot to handle for people. So. Well, I'll go solid contender.
I think that's the thing with Gilbert is he is. I'd say he's kind of in terms of I also want to call him great because of where he stands in a division that's just painfully constipated. Because if you look at
and it's happened to him too. He only fought one time in 2022. No matter how much he wanted to fight more.
Exactly. Like it's like you call him the Ortega. I'd call him like the Calvin Kattar of welterweight, and like the
Yeah,
similar
he has
position
that
of,
too.
the
Yeah,
division, right?
and Calvin
But
Kattar also secretly the third best featherweight in the world.
exactly for
When
forever.
people didn't realize it, right? So
Yeah, and it's also that he's hurt by fighting so often against guys he probably shouldn't be fighting. You know, like Calvin Kattar, he fought Josh Emmett when he didn't really need to. He could have just waited for like an Ortega. And Gilbert Burns had the Chimaev fight right after beating Wonderboy when he could have just waited for like Colby Covington,
yeah,
Bilal Muhammad, someone like that.
Masvidal, something like that.
Yeah. So
And we'll see where Gilbert's career goes. He might just be old now, which would
yeah,
be a bit sad, because he does have miles. His style is pretty athletic. It's very athletically reliant, I should say.
yeah,
The speed and the power are huge to his game.
exactly.
So we'll see how his career goes from here. He might, not look great against Masvidal. He might not look great against, the likes of like Shavkat and Della Magdalena and stuff like that, where you might go like, oh, these young guys smoke them or whatever. But I think for a time he was low key like,
yeah, he was a guy. He was
really
a
good
top dude.
and like a proper guy who was like a problem to the Leon Usman welterweight tier.
Yeah, I mean, I think even now, like him versus Leon is kind of the fight I want to see for welterweight because
it would be fun.
Like,
it would be fun.
Yeah, like I'm cool with the prospect class, but I feel like I don't know, Gilbert just has something. It's a cool fight.
Yeah. Okay, we can move on to Verdum. He's a pretty cool fighter.
Yeah, I'd say Verdum, great but lucky, just classic heavyweight greatness.
Yeah. Do you think he belongs? Where do you think?
Above...
The great but luckies get so hard because you're already like giving them favor.
Yeah.
So you're like, which guy do I think it was less lucky? We agree they're lucky.
Yeah.
We agree they're lucky.
Say,
but which was more?
Yeah, I think I'd say above Glover. I'm not sure above Machida. Maybe above Machida. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think he belongs here. This is where I would put him.
Yeah, because I think legit all-time great heavyweight. Really classic like Cordero style for heavyweight in the way that you don't really see. Not a great boxer.
Late bloomer. You have to like take that into account. So he does have a bit of the unlucky part to him of like he just became good late in that athletic prime.
Yeah.
But he beat good fighters. And
he had Fedor, he had Kane. Yeah.
Yeah, owned Mark Hunt, right? Like guys like that, right? Where
has that one win over Overeem too, like super early in his career, lost the series, but still like that's nothing to scoff at.
Yeah, I like Verdum's style. I think this is a bit of a skill pick over like a longevity, resume type pick. Where I just feel like that Cordero style, the way he was able to implement it, the wins over like Kane. And,
I think
obviously.
Yeah, I think his resume stands up. Like, if you look at guys like Kane, right? Like, people rate him super highly for beating like two guys over a 7-year period.
Yeah.
But Verdum doesn't have that. He beat a bunch of guys who were very good for heavyweight over a pretty decent amount of time. So yeah, I'd say he was a true all-time great heavyweight. Obviously below the likes of Stipe and Fedor, but like very, very good fighter. And he had the sort of slop to his style that heavyweights always have, the shifting flurries and all that, but he used it smartly, and that's really what counts. So, speaking of shifting flurries and slop, we have Vitor Belfort.
So Vitor Belfort, very similar
I'd say
fighter.
Solid contender, but
he belongs in this. I think him and Alves are a little bit of clones of each other a little bit. This is where I have him. He's a good fighter. Michael Bisping, Luke Rockhold. I think here is actually probably.
I think he had a good little run in the middle where he became a really good kicker and started double attacking people. So I think that was Dan Henderson, Luke Rockhold, and Michael Bisping. That's a great run.
Yeah, that's and he really like finished them. Like not like
he beat the shit out of them.
Yeah, looked like really super dangerous. Weidman owns one of Weidman's best wins.
Definitely,
but that's because Vitor was dangerous, right? That's
exactly.
He was a fighter who had a game that was serious. Not a great grappler. I mean, Anderson Silva just like front kicked him in the face. So he had porous defense for sure.
Yeah, he came from those really early days. Like I feel like his game developed a little bit, but you still kind of have to judge him by the like. We're not going to call all the the Vanderlei and the Pedro Hizo and all those guys as trash just because they came from that time. And Vitor, he lasted a long time, but he was still kind of that time, if that makes sense. So.
Okay, Jacare Souza. What do you think?
Jacare.
So I have an opinion, and it's similar to my Burns opinion, which is I think he belongs in the great but unlucky. Because when we talked about JDS, when we talked about like Shogun, when we talked about like where you can like see a championship win in there.
Yeah.
I think Jacare, like Bisping, if Romero ever became champ, I feel like he could have probably.
Yeah.
He put on a close fight with Romero. I think he would have done that in, if they had another fight in the top.
5 rounds.
I think it would have been another, close fight. Whitaker was obviously better than him.
But Whitaker also a horrible style matchup.
So but a horrible style matchup. And someone like Israel Adesanya, he, would have had a chance in his prime for sure.
Yeah.
He's better than Mousasi. He beat Mousasi.
Pereira, he might just grapple Pereira.
Right. So to me, he's unlucky. Just kind of like tough matchup for the era. Yoel.
I mean, for me personally, it's
all that stuff.
Yeah. For me personally,
Yoel, Whitaker, they're just tough.
It's one where I kind of have to balance how much I kind of disliked his game and how he developed versus how good he actually was. Because, like, first of all, phenomenal grappler. I have to get that out of the way immediately. Just one of the best grapplers that MMA's ever seen. But also just, like, never really built a skill set around getting there at all. Horrible shot in the open. Solid wrestling against the cage, but didn't really bother to, like, build a skill set around that either. Like, even when he started to pressure, he'd always just, like, pressure to land big body shots and combinations, which he wasn't as good at as he was at grappling people, which he just stopped trying after a certain point. So, weird skill set. And I think my hot take on middleweight is just generally that Michael Bisping was kind of a more viable champion at his best than people thought. And he would have been a tough fight for Jacare.
I do respect, but I think
Jacare had a shot there, 100%.
Yeah, I think the grappling, he definitely has the shot. Yeah. And much more convincing wins over Derek Brunson than a lot of good middleweights.
Oh, that's definitely true.
Right? Like Yoel,
Oh yeah, that's actually super weird.
But like he was like, oh, I'm not gonna have trouble with Derek Brunson.
Yeah, he just killed him once, and then the second time, like 10 years later, he just killed him again.
Yeah. And he had that like horrible fight with Kelvin Gastelum, but he
arguably won it, yeah.
And also he had like this horrible cut because the hotel didn't have a sauna or something crazy like that.
Yeah, Brazilians always have some stuff like that for some reason.
He had to like jump rope to lose weight.
Yeah.
To lose water.
He looked in bad shape in that fight, and he still nearly won it.
I don't really like hold it super against them. So I believe Jacare was really good, and I believe he had like that like championship tier with a defense in him.
Yeah.
With like the right roll of the dice that he just kind of missed out on.
I think it's mostly just.
And I think he was like the third best middleweight for a couple years probably.
Yeah, I think it's mostly just kind of weird because if I like look at him next to a Sun Tzu, it's like you have this one guy who's kind of built to be old and last forever and has a super cogent skill set versus this other guy who's just he's like really good at one thing but also hasn't really thought about his skill set at all, just a much less intelligent fighter. But yeah, I think that's kind of the right spot. Like, I think if he fought Bisping, he either would have vaulted up to, like, great tier or, like, people would have been like, oh, he's overrated all along, which both of which would have been wrong. But it's an interesting situation. Yeah, I think he's in the right spot now. It's just I guess he's not my cup of tea, but he's a very good fighter.
Yeah, I'm taking an executive decision for Jacare respect. Ryan Ragler
very fair.
Will not be happy with me, but I give him props.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, he's had some bangers too. Like Weidman, that was a fantastic fight, and Herman said he looked good.
So Pedro Munoz, another bantamweight. We love Brazilian bantamweights. Sure. Yeah, we love Brazilian bantamweights. And where you think he belongs in the Edson tier or a little bit above?
I think he's just smaller Thiago Alves, right?
Yeah, that's how I feel about him too. Another Vita, because I think he was like top 5 for a little bit, right?
Yeah, and I mean he gave Sterling a much tougher fight than most people.
Yeah, and he beat knocked out Garbrandt.
Beat Rob Font. Like I think Rob Font is probably his best win.
Yeah, I think I might move him to the top of this type of thing. Yeah, I respect Pedro Munoz. Jimmy Rivera win, right? That's a good win. Bantamweight's a high skill division. Being top 5, even for a little bit, you're like a really solid contender.
I think that's what's weird is
I think he wouldn't have beaten someone like Marlon Moraes if they fought when they were both good. So, but I think he would have been tough.
He could have. Over 5 rounds, that could have actually been really tough. Just he's way too durable.
I hate doing that to Marlon with the 5 rounds. He's not a guy who's like built for 5 rounds.
He's just way too durable for that. Like Marlon would have been the Cejudo fight if Cejudo was like running at 0.25 speed. But I think that's the funny thing about Munoz is that he never really looked like a really fantastic fighter, if that makes sense. Super basic-ish skill set, but he knew what he was doing. incredibly opportunistic. Like he was both attritive and opportunistic at the right time. He basically created his own luck, which is it's a good way to do it, right? Like you look at Munoz against like more process-driven fighters, your Rob Fonts, even your Cody Garbrands, your Jimmy Rivera's. He looks like he makes less sense, but he's also going to beat them a solid amount of the time, just because he's built that way. He's built to exist at you until you die.
Yeah, he does have that really just a loss he should not have against Frankie Edgar. He definitely wins. Also, I'm not impressed with it.
That was a weird showing.
So that kind of like, and also the Sterling fight too. He puts a tough fight for Sterling, but also he looks like he gets embarrassed a few times in that fight, really bad. Where Sterling like does ridiculous things.
Sterling just boxes on him.
Yeah, and you're like, oh my god. That's where like I don't see like prime Gilbert Burns or Maya getting treated like that. Right. So I have to like put him a bit. Just though it was like he has this factor to him where it's like sometimes guys just look too smart for him.
Yeah, he looks like a big
stupid stuff. Yeah. He gets a bit like plotty zombie fighting.
I mean, I think that's what's kind of funny is like if you look at like Munoz against like young solid contender guys, he looks actually really good sometimes.
Yeah, he looks really process driven and like smart, and then against guys who are like
old guys,
creative, and
that's what's so funny, right? Like you look at Edgar, Cruz, and Aldo. Munoz he doesn't get clowned against Edgar, but he does like lose that fight on vibes. He doesn't actually lose it, but like Edgar looks like a better fighter in certain respects. But then you look at him against Sean O'Malley,
and
he's just like
a better fighter, but
well, I mean,
Frank Edgar
time,
owns was a much better fighter, and you can see it like peeking out.
Exactly.
Like how competitive that fight is when it shouldn't be.
Exactly. Like Frankie Edgar obviously at his best better than Munoz. Like in this tier list, he'd be somewhere in GOAT tier. But it's just at that time he shouldn't have been, and Pedro Munoz made it look a lot harder than it should have been. But then you look at him against the younger guys, you look at him against the Rob Font, Jimmy Rivera's, even Sean O'Malley's, and he looks a lot better for some reason. Like he looked like trash against O'Malley, but it was still a much more competitive fight. So
we're on to one of your faves next.
Top boy.
Yeah.
I'd say Juicy Formiga. I'd say under a Sunsao, but by like a smidge, just because the division's worse.
Yeah, that's where I feel is fair. I feel like he's so I actually would put Sunsao in kind of like an above tier for the great but unlucky. I don't feel like Formiga is like, it's not like I can't imagine a world where Formiga is first in this. So therefore he's clear. Fair. He's a very clear second, right? Right now. I don't know if we'll see anymore.
I mean, they're both kind of done. I think Sunsao,
it's Figueiredo in his prime is like this great win.
Yeah.
Sergio Pettis, who is like super quality, Dustin Ortiz, Zach Mikowski, Scott Jorgensen, good fighters.
It's just fighters, right? He just ran into a really horrible style matchup in Joe Benavidez several times.
Yeah, and Judd Dodson was just like always going to be way too athletic and tricky for him.
It's also kind of a thing where with Sunsao, like there are several champions who you could have given him a good shot at. Renan Barão, Cody Garbrandt, when Sunsao was good. He beat TJ Dillashaw once. Who else? Like, I mean, hell, Peter Yan. Prime Sunsao versus Yan is great. Sterling.
Prime Sterling still,
Like
I would probably pick Prime Sterling. You would probably go with Sunsao, but
I don't know. It's
close, I think they're good fighters who give each other problems.
Yeah, but that's like against champions. I think Sunsao has a shot against almost every single one of his era, except for like the second Dillashaw. I don't think Sunsao ever beats him, but he still gives him a good fight. Where against DJ, I think Formiga always struggles a lot. He probably just gets volumed.
Yeah, and he probably struggles against the second and third best guys. Benavidez. And you're like, oh, it sounds like we're saying he's the fourth best guy of an era. The DJ Dodson Benavidez era of flyweight is amazingly good.
Exactly.
Like, insanely underrated division. Was that trio in that division at that time.
And it's also a situation where we saw two guys who would perhaps beat Joe in his prime, and Sergio and Fig lose pretty wide to Formiga. Well, not they lost convincingly to Formiga. I'll put it that way.
They got Formiga. They got Formiga.
Exactly.
The thing to say. He got his game off. Right.
Exactly. Like I think Joe against Prime Joe against Prime Fig, that's close, but I think Fig beats him reasonably consistently, honestly. And Sergio, that's a little bit more touch and go, but both guys struggle a lot more against Formiga than they do against Benavidez, which is why I think the whole, he's worse than Benavidez thing. I'm not sure that's entirely true. Benavidez is just a really, really horrible style matchup for him.
I would say Benavidez is better, but
yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah. That's not a huge margin, I guess, is the point.
Benavidez has a lot of good wins.
Yeah. Just a legit ATG in his own right too. So
yeah,
it's just I think Formiga just a super interesting game. Like he's like if Jose Aldo was in the Cheeto Vera mode all the time in the third round, just constant, really slick back.
So people might be wondering what's the unlucky part about him and why isn't he just like great with? And it is just that he is like so unathletic.
And never got a title shot. Like he wouldn't have won it.
And was just like old and like that's really the thing is like he was in a division that had ridiculous competition. If he was in a bad division, he would have looked a lot.
He would have been champ.
Yeah, I don't know how bad you need the division to be for him to be champ.
I would say not.
I don't think it's like a division that doesn't exist. I don't think it's like, oh, you need a division worse than heavyweight or something like that. I think he's like So I'm pretty comfortable. Great, but unlucky. Renan Barão.
Barão's interesting
fighter, interesting career, unfortunate career in a lot of ways.
But also, I think Barão pretty much depends entirely on how you think he would have done against Cruz.
Right. That's like really is like, is he like the most lucky fighter ever, or is he unlucky? Is he one of the most unlucky fighters ever? Right. You can really is like entirely hinges on like, do you think he gets an all-time great win against Dominic Cruz, or do you think he gets fraud checked by Dominic Cruz?
And I think
is there somewhere in the middle, right? And I agree. I actually do think he beats Dominic Cruz. I am on that side of the equation.
Yeah, it's just he's like even if he's not necessarily better than Cruz, given the Dillashaw relationship, it's just a fight where Cruz he can't exist in the pocket with Barão as like kind of weirdly sloppy as Barão can get. His positioning was just classic Nova União greatness, and he's not getting taken down ever by anybody.
Yeah, so I am on he is like actually pretty unlucky. The fact that he became champ when the division shallowed a bit, right? When it lost, some talent was just things keeping him from getting great wins.
Exactly. It's kind of like the Silva situation.
Yeah.
Where
so here's the argument is does he deserve it over Assunção then?
I'm not sure. I think Assunção was a lot unluckier because he never got to the belt, and the head-to-head could have been interesting there. I'm not sure.
This is tough. I feel like when we said like Formiga doesn't have an argument for being 2, now, or it doesn't have an argument for being 1, I feel that this is different for Barão.
Yeah, Barão has an argument for
an argument for 1. Yeah. And to be honest, if he is like a great but lucky guy, we could put him in the GOAT tier, to be honest.
Yeah.
Just because bantamweight's such a strong division, and if you have a long career there, then you can. But the TJ fights take a ton out of him.
Yeah.
People don't realize that TJ is one of the 10 best, most skilled fighters of all time.
Pretty much.
Going into those fights.
And it just ruined his career. That's what's
by
so
the
sad.
Second fight, he's like fighting just one of the most destructive offensive tornadoes. Yeah, just that the sport has ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, the fact that Assunção held TJ, like even the best TJ, to so much less work, it kind of does speak to Assunção maybe being a better fighter. But that's also just a style matchup, right? Like Assunção is built to keep guys to less work. But also, I'm not sure how many matchups give Assunção a hard fight that don't kill Barão. Maybe like Sandhagen, but just because of the wrestling.
Yeah, that's probably where I would say is like that type of matchup. Yeah.
But I mean, Sandhagen also clowns him on the feet.
It'd be interesting to think about a Sterling Barão.
I mean, I feel like Barão gave him a hard enough fight post-prime, like way post-prime.
I think Sterling improved more than people give credit for sometimes, like when you look at his later fights.
That's true.
But Sterling is always kind of like, he's a little bit like that Donald Trump tweet where they say like, how is old Donnie going to get out of this time? And Donald Trump easily escapes. Oh, well, shucks. That's like Sterling. It's like, oh, Sterling's really in for a horrible matchup this time. How is he going to deal with such a competent pressure striker who builds attritionally? And then you're like, oh, he's landed 9 spinning back fists in one fight. And you're like, how did that happen? That's kind of Sterling. He's always like a little bit more troublesome than you expect him to be. So when you do these like head-to-heads, you almost have to like adjust for how unexpected his
it's like Yair Rodriguez, but if
right. It's very similar to Yair Rodriguez. Obviously, he's a lot better than
exactly.
Rodriguez, but okay, Renato Moicano. This is one of our
Yeah,
this is one where love
top
is
dude.
perhaps equal. We love him very,
Yeah,
very, very, very much.
he's very cool. And honestly, I think the Cater fight shows that he
How high his
genuinely
peak
could have
was.
been. Yeah, like
Yeah,
he was a fantastic fighter
yeah.
at featherweight.
I think he wasn't as matchup proof as Cater, despite being able to beat Cater.
Yeah,
For like that Ortega and that
yeah,
Yair type of fight, which I feel
yeah.
like Cater is like
Cater probably beats the
right.
crap out of Ortega,
Yeah,
but
and then but Hanato has this ability to beat Cater, to style on Cater,
exactly.
and to just look, awesome in some fights where it's just
Yeah,
you're wrecking Cub Swanson, stuff like that,
yeah.
right?
I mean, I
Um,
think
a Cub
the
Swanson was on a little run, I'm pretty sure, when he did it.
I
Maybe
think Swanson was on
misunderstood.
a skid. Swanson
Oh,
was
on a
off.
split. Okay, maybe
Yeah,
I'm
he was
mixing
off
them.
losing to Edgar and Ortega, I believe.
Oh, okay,
But
no, never mind.
he still did him better. He did him worse than both of them, and he did him worse
Yeah,
than Burgos too, right after. So
yeah, that's true.
yeah, but I think Moicano is right up there in solid contender. Where exactly in solid contender, I'm not sure. I think he has the potential to end up as kind of a low key great, just getting like wins without ever being champ. But as of now, yeah, I think
Yeah, he's
uh,
not like ancient or anything too. So he has
yeah,
like career. Yeah, what's his age? Oh no, he's 33. He's a bit older than I thought.
yeah, especially
And
with
he
the
has. And
RDA
I think he's been
miles.
fighting since like 2014 as well,
Yeah,
maybe
he's been
earlier.
around for a second.
But yeah, and it's tough when we talk about that matchup proofness.
Yeah,
With
the
like the
KZ
Fiziev
loss.
type of
Yeah,
thing is like the type of guy he has trouble with.
yeah. I mean, I
So
think it
it's
depends on
interesting.
how.
Like we said earlier, like Cater, low key, the third best fighter in his division for a couple years, just like
Yeah,
Gilbert has
yeah,
been. And the reason I say that is even though he lost to Hanato Moicano, he's just much more matchup proof than Hanato
exactly.
Moicano
Yeah,
is
he's
to
not going to
to
get
like
beamed by
certain
KZ.
to like certain athletes and certain and certain like punchers and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I mean, I
that's
think
why I don't put him in like a great tier, just because
yeah,
there's such a hard um specific, not even uncommon type of striker who he struggles with, right?
yeah. I think it's interesting because you get some guys like Moicano often who are like, it's like I don't know, like Eddie Alvarez, Jimmy Rivera, those sorts of guys who like they can give super elite guys really hard challenges, but there are also certain kinds of matchups who just like they're really Michael Johnson maybe in his prime too, where like you give them really good shots against tippy top guys, but they're also a lot easier to beat than those guys if you're the right kind of fighter. And I think Moicano is that, where you're always going to have a shot against him if you are just, a huge puncher who's willing to throw with him. But if you're not that, and if you think a little bit with him, he's going to outthink you.
Yeah.
And I think it's also bears mentioning he has a really unique skill set for MMA, right? Like if you look at kickers in MMA, most of them suck at kicking. Like they're really, really dumb. They're not good at it whatsoever. And Moicano is a big exception. He's one of the like the Cater fight is maybe the best kicking showcase in MMA ever. It's so good. Tons of counter kicking, the
Well,
jab.
it's definitely like a very like this is how you kick a boxer
Exactly.
performance. That is like a very like perfect execution
Yeah,
on
like
that. And I feel like solid contenders is when we introduced it, where it's like you can be top 5, you stick around in the top 5, you stick around in the top 10. That's
yeah.
Moicano. When he was a
Moicano is
featherweight,
proof of that. Yeah.
he was easily top 10. He was, definitely like that 6'5", 4
Yeah.
range. He beat really good guys like Calvin Cater.
Yeah.
So he just
And
belongs in the solid
even
contenders.
even lightweight, like I can see him being reasonably successful. Like I'm worried about his physical integrity, obviously, but like you give him the right sort of matchup, and I think he looks fine until he dies, if that makes sense. Like give him Chandler. Chandler's going to kill him at some point. It is
Yeah,
inevitable. But
yeah.
he's going to kick Chandler very hard until that happens.
Yeah, he's gonna body kick him, and it's gonna make a really loud noise at one point, and people are gonna be like, "Oh my god, is he gonna beat Chandler?" And then he gets bombed and loses.
Killed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
So
fine.
Pedro Hizo, he was a really important early MMA fighter.
Yeah.
Really important to Brazilian MMA into
Yeah.
its development. Guys he trained.
Yeah, I don't have as much of a take on him as a fighter as much as I do as him on a coach and as someone who builds future fighters. And in that situation, with the whole shoot box thing, he is GOAT tier. But
yeah, I mean, he is the teacher of, he's the master for Hani
yeah,
Barcelos, who we rate as a good action fighter who's
he's
smart and
very
has good
good.
tools. Pedro Rizzo in an era where it wasn't very, high level MMA, a lot of holes. The athletic quality of the sport was pretty low, but I give a lot of respect to Pedro Rizzo as.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this era you do have to judge based on like their era. It's pretty much impossible not to. There's just no way. So yeah. Oh wait, was he shoot box? No wait, he wasn't shoot box.
No, he was Vale Tudo, but
Right.
there was a lot of guys who come from that Vale
true.
Tudo camp. Yeah.
Yeah.
I forget what the name of the specific. It's like who?
I feel like it was Anderson Silva's camp. It was like it might have been Black House.
Yeah, I think it was. He did a lot of stuff with like Shogun and stuff like that too. I think
it's just, it feels shoot boxy. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, big respect, Pedro Rizzo. Pedro Rizzo. Where do you think? Do you think he has that like greatness level? I feel like
I'm not
he
really
is.
Sure. Like I feel like that's the problem with these old timey guys is it's really hard to judge them by their fights because everyone of their era is kind of mid. But I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, like he doesn't have like any of these like. He doesn't have like this type of win where it's like, what, he beat Crow Cop once or something like that, where you're like,
yeah,
well, I really respect that guy. They're not there. It's like,
I mean, he has
Rico
a couple.
Rodriguez. It's like Jeff Monson.
He has a win over Barnett. That's not bad.
Yeah.
But
Barnett's probably is like he has a loss to Barnett, I'm pretty sure.
No, he might not have lost to him too, but he beat.
Oh Barnett, right, he did beat him, and then he got knocked out later. Yeah, also from that MMA era where guys didn't have awesome records. It wasn't like they
exactly
because the preparation, the planning wasn't like there. So you can't even like totally. But I think important figure.
Yeah, he has a legacy.
I'm gonna put him. I think I'm comfortable with putting okay.
Yeah.
But we're gonna put guys like coming up Bustamante. We're gonna put them in okay. But
they're very good for their time.
They're very good for their time,
and they're important.
They're very important. We put them on here because we wanted to at least mention them. We can mention Sriram Muralidaran. He's also a
action fighter for sure.
Do you think he's top of okay, or do you think he is action?
I think he's action. As I mentioned, action isn't really subordinate, or
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
That is true. Yeah.
So I think he's kind of definition of action. Super cool skill set. Does a lot of long clinch stuff. Arce, a fantastic win at the time.
Yeah, and an amazing fight. Like
that fight was great.
Fight is a fantastic fight. Bloody, brutal.
That was definitely fight of the night at 2:30. I think they gave it to like some Lando Venata fight, and it made me so mad. But Shaman, super fun fighter, lots of cool body work, really unique clincher. I think like
cool kicker. He's powerful kicker. He just never really was able to like adapt and figure out his style for MMA totally. Someone like crafty and smart and a good kickboxer like Andre Fili was able to deal with him.
He's kind of like a Michael Johnson type. He's not very smart, but he can make it work, and big athletic advantages. And he wasn't as good as Michael Johnson in his prime, obviously, but who was? So.
Cool tools.
Yeah. Just a fighter who was less than the sum of his parts, but that happens.
And as you said, definitely an action-packed fighter.
I remember that fight with Matt Sales.
And an awesome cool KO of Marlon Moraes. Poor Marlon Moraes.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
he's 1-1 with Marlon, right?
Yeah, and two cool fights. Two really cool fights. Murilo Bustamante up next. We'll put him in okay, but let's do the quick running about him.
Early middleweight champion, right?
Early middleweight champion. A guy who like definitely tried to be well-rounded. And one of like the first Brazilians who you would watch and you would go like, and you to break through and you would go like, oh, this guy isn't just trying to like pull guillotine the whole time. And he also isn't just doing like shoot box Muay Thai. He's like, he, would try both in a fight. And he had, he worked on his strength and conditioning at the time, which was pretty like important. He had pretty shredded bod at the time.
That's also true.
Yeah. Got some good wins against, or like good for the time wins against, the best guys of that division at the time.
Yeah, he was a legitimate champion, which is
and an important figure for like Brazil because he is such an early Brazilian champion.
Just like guys from that time, they're never really gonna stand up really great, but he was a fighter who he was important.
Yeah, and definitely important, and
Yeah.
Big respect to
Yeah.
He might be a fascist or something, and I don't know, but big respect.
That's fine. Yeah,
Big
we're
respect.
okay with that.
I respect him as a fighter. Wilson Hayes, flyweight,
Yeah,
challenger.
yeah, I think
Not
it's
great though.
weird to call him a title challenger because he didn't really
Right.
deserve it.
That's I was brought it up specifically for that reason, because he didn't deserve it and it wasn't competitive, and he never really looked like he deserved it against guys who are good enough to be real title challengers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's weird is I think Wilson Hayes was actually a very good fighter, like by all MMA standards, but like he wasn't very diverse. He had like a really hard body kick and a really nice top game and not much else.
Yeah.
And yeah, he got totally owned by DJ, like everyone does, but like he also lost to Formiga, like really, really close to that, like before that. And he got the title shot anyway through like some sort of the Ultimate Fighter thing.
He got knocked out by Pantoja when he was older, but I don't really think like he would have done much better against Pantoja.
Yeah, like I liked him. I don't really know why I liked him, but I found him cool enough.
He was bald and Brazilian.
That's very possible. Yeah, I'm very superficial when I think it was the Jorgensen finish where like body kicked him really hard and then arm triangled him. That's very cool to do. But
that is always a cool thing to do. Any guy who has some like club and sub finishes, I will definitely favor.
I'll stand.
I think I'll put him in the action fighter. I don't really want to do. Do you think he deserves this? Like,
I mean,
like, do you think he's as good as Trinaldo?
I don't think he was as good as Trinaldo.
No, I don't know. But I don't really feel like he is as good as Paulo Costa, to be honest.
Yeah, I think okay is probably the spot where I'd put him because he wasn't really like geared towards action.
Yeah,
but
that's fine.
Yeah, I think it's weird because like I think at current flyweight he'd do fine. It's just current flyweight's ass. Like it's really bad.
That's
so.
Yeah, I no disrespect to all the flyweights. They try very hard, and
it's just the division has lost a lot of the guys who are good, who are like pound for pound tier. But
yeah, and there's a lot of guys who like are resting on their laurels of their talent and aren't really like. It's not a Shark Tank where guys are getting a lot better, to really like hunt a great champ or great contenders or anything.
I mean, the way I'd see Hayes is that he's kind of more important than he was good because when guys like him started getting cut from flyweight, that's when the division really fell off a cliff. Because he was, a good fighter who made up the sort of normal, like 7 to 13-ish tier that flyweight kind of lacked at that point. And once they started cutting guys like that, guys like Perez would have to go straight from like Jordan Espinosa to Formiga, which it doesn't really work for a division. So you need Wilson Hayes in your division, and he was functional. He was fine. I respect him a lot. Just not really the guy to be much higher than okay.
And he never really like had like great finishing against guys who you feel like Yuta Sasaki and stuff, where you're like, those guys should be finished. You should finish them and stuff. We can move on to Ronnie Yaya, who's a great old man.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Classic old man Brazilian, almost no athleticism whatsoever.
I feel like he has to be okay.
Yes, no, I definitely think he's. I would never put him in Gracie. That'd be so mean to him.
I can see the argument for action fighter, but I'm not sure about it. Just because he's not really built to be an action fighter, if that makes sense. Like a lot of his fights end up actiony, but he doesn't want that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he doesn't have a lot. Remember when they tried to match him up with Cody Garbrandt?
Oh my god, that would have been so mean.
Why? Anyways. I like Ronnie. He had a good little run. I think it was like a 3-fight run or maybe a 4-fight run.
He had a little comeback against Luke Saunders, I think. And
and tough, crafty on the ground. Good at avoiding the like really like dangerous, athletic sequences where he'll lose.
But I also think that it's a lot like Maia, like a much lower level Maia, if you think about it. Like if you put him against someone like Ricky Simone, he's just never going to get anywhere. There's 0 chance he wins that.
I was just meaning like against like someone like Luke Saunders, who will probably punch harder than he possibly can. He's like, well, I'm just not going to punch with you, right?
That's true.
I'm just gonna avoid that the whole fight, or the like 4 minutes of the fight where I don't heel hook you or whatever, right?
Exactly.
So I like him for that. That was just like my 2 cents on Ronnie.
Yeah, he's cool. I respect him. Like just being unathletic at bantamweight, you can't really do that and be successful. And he was more successful than you should be doing that, beating guys who were pretty solid. Not no one really special, but guys who are notable-ish. So Yeah, Vanderlei Silva.
I think you have to say he's great just because
Yeah,
of his notoriety. Maybe or maybe I don't know, like
yeah, I don't really have a great opinion on where
yeah,
he stands among the greats. Definitely below
just
Marias,
yeah,
but
just like not a
yeah.
good striker really, but super powerful and
And he had
insanely
good ideas for the
confident.
time. Like
Yeah,
punching
and
into the clinch is something that guys even don't really do that well now. So
yeah,
being able to just punch, chase guys into the double collar tie and kill the shit out of their
yeah,
bodies is cool. That's very good. But
fantastic chin.
yeah,
Awesome nickname. Axe Murderer is
definitely.
sick.
Yeah. I mean, I think a
Uh,
little bit craftier than he got credit for too. Like the Bisping win, like you don't normally see guys
right, yeah,
anti-volume that hard.
yeah.
But
And some just sickly brutal finishes. Like
yeah, just
earned his nickname
incredibly violent
with
fighter.
blood. And yeah, but weak division, a time in MMA striking where his flaws were not things that were
Yeah.
punished.
Kind of more of a
Um,
pioneer than he gets credit for, which is both good and bad.
yeah, totally. And shootbox is insanely important to the
Yeah.
history of Brazilian MMA. And he is insanely important and was really like the figurehead of that gym, even though you had young guys like Shogun coming up and Silva coming up. He was the ringleader
Yeah,
of
he was the
those guys,
patriarch.
which was sometimes bad when they would beat people up behind, or when he would get in fights with like Crazy Horse Bennett and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
it's Bennett, right?
Yeah, it's Bennett. Yeah.
Yeah.
Felony
But
now. That's his name.
oh really? Wow.
He doesn't go by Crazy Horse anymore. He's now Felony.
Well, that's nice. Okay. Anyways, that's what I have to say about Vanderlei.
Yeah,
Definitely a great.
definitely.
He's too important. He has too many good wins, too many awesome pride moments, name wins, and pioneer. He was a fun fighter. We haven't. I think this is the second Diego Lima fighter, which is
Yeah.
interesting because they're becoming a more important, school
Yeah, I mean,
in
we've left
Brazilian
off some
MMA
guys.
these days.
Yeah, I think we left off Willie Cat. We left off Puro also, but those guys
Yeah,
might end up
they're
on a list like this soon.
they're too young and
Yeah.
really haven't like had wins or competition on the level to be discussed in this. But here we have a guy who did do striking with Diego Lima, I'm pretty sure. Shootbox Diego Lima, the camp, and is kind of the proto Charles Oliveira in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. A lot of the striking aggression, style, tools.
Without being unkillable.
Without being unkillable, without having the
clinch.
ability, without having the clinch, without really having the submission grappling,
Yeah.
without having the ability to go, hey, let's chill for a second, that Charles does. But had some good tools, was super fun fighter, and had some great fights against some good bantamweights. Didn't really win them,
Yeah.
but good fights with like Rob Font, Cody Garbrandt,
Yeah. Honestly, I would actually make an argument for Thomas Almeida, and I can't believe I'm saying this as a solid contender
You would
because
put him all the way up. I don't feel like he is better
because
than I might put him at the top, but
yeah. I mean, here's my argument: is when
right.
I rewatched the Jimmy Rivera fight, I was shocked at how close that fight was. And Jimmy Rivera, he was like, yeah, a limited fighter, but I think a top 5-ish guy for a decently long time. I scored that fight a draw.
8-6 for Jimmy Rivera. I don't feel like Jimmy Rivera was ever like.
I thought he was, but I think like even at bantamweight, if you get to like 5 to 8, you're pretty great.
Do you feel like he has an argument for being a better fighter than Vicente Luque? I just feel like he doesn't have that front choke game or that kind of like real killer power. Like he threw a lot behind his strikes, so he definitely was generating power, and he had that like Diego Lima mechanics that are kind of interesting but seem to work. By interesting I mean not perfect. But I don't feel like I feel like here is a better spot.
I think that's fair. I
feel like
I can't get past that Rivera fight.
But do you not feel like Rivera is a little bit of the type of thing that like where you would see him like peak? Because it's not a guy who's good at, Jimmy Rivera.
Yeah, Rivera can't deal with kicks at all.
And not a great guy at actually like controlling the like tenor or area of the fight. He kind of lets it go where his opponent takes it and gives them initiative. And even though his style kind of works despite that because his boxing and defensive prowess.
I think that's what's weird, right? It's like if you look at a bunch of the guys in the solid contender tier, a bunch of their ceilings are also like beat a top 5 guy who's kind of tailor-made for them to beat. Like if you look at Pedro Munoz, for instance, like I don't think he's beating a real top 5 guy who isn't Rob Font very often, and even Rob Font he's not beating that often, I don't think. And I do think Almeida is worse than those fighters, but I also think bantamweight is the kind of division where you kind of have to be really, really fantastic in general to even really be top 10. And Almeida, well, first of all, I thought he straight up drew Jimmy Rivera. A lot of it is just falling pretty neatly into Jimmy Rivera's weaknesses. But also, he gave Rob Font a really tough fight for a round or so. And then he left, he came back, he looked like trash, which happens.
And at a young age, right? He like loses it pretty early. And he doesn't like pick up great wins.
That's true.
His right. It's Brad Pickett, it's Yves Jovan. It's like they're not. I think honestly, Morales, right?
Honestly, the thing that hurts him for me most is the Garbrandt loss, because I think he should be able to be okay against Garbrandt for longer than he is, which makes me fine with high-level action fighter, at his best at least. But I don't know. It just feels like kind of a waste, I guess. Like I think that's the better way to put it, is he probably should have been a solid contender but wasn't.
Depressing. He's in the depressing class.
He's in the depressing tier between action fighter and solid contender, just like there's the depressing tier between great but unlucky and GOAT tier where Sun Sal lies.
Yeah, sure. I can't put him over.
That's fair.
I have to put him here.
I think there's an argument for it. I'm not sure I fully believe it just because of Cody, but I think that Jimmy Rivera fight is it's a fantastic peak, just an all-time bantamweight banger fight. And I guess Rob Font sort of shut the door on him, but it happens. Like, what can you do?
With one of the nastiest head kicks.
I love that fight. That whole fight is great, but the way that
Almeida, Rob Font so much.
Yeah. Almeida does a really good job dealing with the jab actually for like a whole round. He like counter kicks and
that's kind of like if they're against a right-handed jab.
Yeah.
The Diego Lima guys have tools that are nice.
Yeah. And then he just gets jabbed out of position, killed with a straight, and is just never the same again. Which is I think the problem compared to Charles Oliveira. Oliveira comes back at like double speed. Almeida comes back at like 0.25 speed, like a normal human being, which Charles Oliveira isn't. But
and also he doesn't have that like that scary clinch threat where you're constantly kind of worried about him grabbing you and tying you up and throwing nice knees and stuff. He just didn't have those tools. But
I think he's an underrated threat in terms of defense too. But
despite me being the anti one who's keeping him down, I actually do really love Thomas Almeida. Super fun fighter. I love the Diego Lima striking style. I love even Daniel Santos, Wiley Cat.
Willie Cat rocks. Yeah.
He's just like, I just love even like you're watching him getting rocked by the guys who aren't good in the first round, and you're like, I can't wait to see him come back and throw the nastiest body shots. Yuri Alcantara. Wow, we just get a great string of bantamweights.
I think
I love Yuri Alcantara. I don't know why. To be honest.
I mean, I think it was
action fighter. Just definitely. I don't think he's as good as Douglas Da Silva de Andrade.
Yeah, I think it was Ryan who said that he's good for like he's like elite for like 15 seconds at a time. He has a knockout over Ricardo Lamas, which is kind of insane. But
he's awesome. He's a cool fighter. His Sherdog page or like his Tapology page is like filled with interesting things.
Yeah.
Of like, I don't know if people who started watching the sport 2 years ago or whatever, they might not know he like almost finished Corey Sandhagen.
That fight's so crazy too. Like, it's like 30 seconds in, and if Sandhagen didn't have a weird elbow, like that fight would have been over.
Yeah. So he's awesome. He's cool. Super actiony. Super Brazilian.
Yeah.
This is what it's all about.
He's like Luke A tier, 100% action fighter guy.
Yeah. Okay, so we're on. Is this big or little?
That's Big Nog. See how he's bigger in the frame. I actually just took the same picture of Little Nog and just zoomed in.
No, okay.
So we have to save some bits for 3 hours into the video where no one is watching except for us.
Obviously, like super legendary, right?
Yeah,
like
definitely.
Like one of the most storied, kind of like with all these like legendary moment careers, right? Like these famous fights, right?
Yeah,
he has like that insane like Frank Mir rolling thing.
I mean that's not really a credit to him.
Yeah, I know, but like I'm just talking about like how like how much like notoriety his career has, like Fedor fights, right? Like he has all these crazy, awesome pride fights, and then he has good wins like Crow Cop, right? He has stuff like that, right?
I think Crow Cop's also a weird situation though, where I think he caught Crow Cop really early in his career, but
Crow Cop was good quick though.
Yeah, but he got Yeah, I think Prime Crow Cop probably still beats him, but he's.
Yeah.
I think.
No, I do agree. Prime Crow Cop still beats him, but he just still has that win, which
That's
I still
true.
appreciate.
Yeah.
Josh Burnett, Tim Sylvia, Randy Couture, those are names. Those are like
100%.
He did, which is very important, is that he knocked out Brendan Schaub.
I respect that so much. Just top team behavior.
Great. He's probably too important. Lucky because he's so early in MMA. That's why I put him. He's
Big
not as
Nog,
good as his little brother.
Big Nog and Schaub is like the version of Lil Nog and Sam Alvey. It's just a knockout.
Yeah,
it's like, it's not
almost
important.
identical. Yeah.
It's not important, but you just love to see it.
I think we'll be actually agreeing on the next one.
John Lineker, I would say great but unlucky.
Yeah, that's actually I was thinking either like high solid contender or great but unlucky in the low tier of great but unlucky.
Yeah.
We can talk about it. You go.
Yeah, I mean, I think fantastic fighter. I think people kind of underrate how much craft he had. Really nice, body head combination work. Immortal, which is important to his skill set, but if you're immortal, it's pretty much always going to be important to your skill set. Unlucky because he was in such a great division and ended up. He would have had a title shot if the division wasn't so messed up in 2016, I think. And also all the weight misses. Like I almost want to downgrade him to solid contender because he missed weight like a billion times.
It's almost like, can you really be a contender if you can't make championship weight?
That's true.
I think high solid contender or the great but unlucky. I think I'm a little bit more comfortable with this like high solid this Burns Maya just because like Dillashaw fight. He loses, but there's moments where you're like he hits Dillashaw in the stomach, and you're like, oh my god, and so hard to kill, hits so hard.
And honestly, I think if you want to argue unlucky, it's that the Garbrandt fight got canceled.
Right. It was like he would have murdered him. I'm a little bit more comfortable with the solid content. I would err on caution.
Yeah, I mean, I love his game.
Do you think that this has been?
I think head to head he beat Moicano just because he's that kind of fighter.
Right. Yeah.
But
and Maya just too much of a resume, probably.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But I really like him. He was really good. He could give guys who are really good tough fights just on his durability, his competent grappling.
And he beat Sandhagen. I thought he beat Sandhagen for sure.
We should have mentioned that. It was like he like puts a crazy fight on Sandhagen. I think that I haven't watched that fight in a long time, but I remember thinking that Sandhagen had a bit more of an argument than people who are crying robbery. But definitely he had an argument for winning.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Lineker won. I thought it was on rewatch. I actually think it's a much closer fight because we know that Sandhagen actually hits like really hard without it looking that hard. If that makes sense. Like his jabs just really hurt people. But
and also we know that like Sandhagen has an insane chin, so I'm like, he's getting thrown around by punches, but I'm like, I don't think he's actually rocked in a lot. He definitely gets rocked late
at the end. And he gets hit in the body a billion times.
Yeah, but I think that it's a deceptive fight in a lot of ways just because of how hard it looks like one guy's punching.
So
still
Lineker has
really close, right? And against a great fighter.
Lineker has, I mean, if you want to give him the fight against Sandhagen, you can. You want to give him the fight against Dotson, you can. Squished Rob Font early in Font's UFC career. That's a good one. Who else? There's...
Fabricio
his one career hasn't been bad. Yeah, I mean, did he beat Andrade? Yeah.
No, Fabricio de Andrade. I was saying is his most recent fight where he survived because he got.
That's so bad.
He was getting owned in that fight. But Fabricio de Andrade is super good.
He's very good.
That's not a dig on old Lineker.
Yeah, and he beat Cheeto. Cheeto also a very good win. That was sort of a shakier win, but he has like wins over an entire tier, right? He has arguably Sandhagen, definitely Font and Vera, Kelleher, not a bad win, and he absolutely killed him. Dotson, a good win.
Yeah, I think you could argue he's like really high in solid contender. I think resume, him and Maya is pretty close. Skill level, him and Burns is pretty close.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to put him in unlucky because I don't feel like the ceiling is there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are divisions where someone like Lineker could be champion, but they'd have to be kind of
flyweight.
Divisions.
I don't know.
I mean, he was at flyweight too, and it's
that's
tough.
Insane. It's like,
was he ever actually at flyweight? Did he make weight once there?
I have no clue.
Yeah. Yeah, flyweight's just a bunch of
Anyways,
catch weights because he missed
real
weight.
respect for them. If you're like, oh, these guys got it wrong, Lineker's awesome.
We would respect that.
I would respect that opinion.
Yeah.
When we talk about Thiago Santos, I think he is
Beat the GOAT.
low solid contender. I think he's like,
Yeah,
I think he's around the Trinaldo Costa era.
Yeah, I think he's definitely worse than Trinaldo, but also has more to show for it, which I think there's, we're seeing some of that.
He has the Jan Blachowicz win. He has like
Yeah.
what, Kevin Holland. Did he beat Gerald Meerschaert?
Yeah, he beat Gerald Meerschaert. He beat John Jones.
He did beat John Jones.
I think that's what's funny about Thiago Santos is he has like he was a gatekeeper.
Right.
Yeah. And he was a gatekeeper at middleweight for a while, but in like a really like, if you beat him, you're going to completely destroy him way. Like David Branch just wrecked him with ease. Eric Spicely choked him in a round. Who else? I feel like Gegard Mousasi killed him in a round. But then he goes up to light heavyweight, and he's still like this gatekeeper guy who loses to everyone good, but he makes them look like shit so often. Like he made John Jones look awful. He made Rakic look awful. He made Ankalaev look awful. He made Hill look kind of bad. And
yeah, no, that's totally true. Yeah,
like I don't understand how that happens. Like he went up a weight.
He did rock Glover super bad, right?
Yeah, he did.
He definitely gave Glover the average 2.5 or whatever knockdowns that he gets in every fight.
Yeah, he dropped him twice, I think. He at one point he was like swatting.
One of the all-time great fights with Jimmy Manuwa. We should definitely remember. Just one of the most crazy. He throws a tornado kick when he has zero energy. Like it's like it's like in UFC 3 when you have no energy, and he still throws a tornado kick at the end of the first round, and it just kind of like flies through the air weirdly, and he doesn't even land on his feet.
Yeah, it's so weird to think about him as a fighter because like it feels like he should be getting owned by so many more guys than he does, but light heavyweight just doesn't have the resources. I think that's a good place for him. Like I feel like Costa might be a better fighter, but Costa also doesn't have the wins. So
yeah, but that's where it's so reliant on that Yoel win, even keeping him here, and like the Vittori decision where he gets to fight at 205.
And of course, we don't know that Costa doesn't lose to David Branch. So
right, I bet 100%. We can move on to Bigfoot.
Beat you like you stole something.
Well, I'm not going to be too mean to him because life has been very.
Oh my god! Yeah, Bigfoot. You kind of have to cancel out the last decade of his career.
I'm putting him in action fighter because he had great action.
Yeah, he was a good heavyweight. Beat Overeem, which is a very good win. Even Overeem looked good in that fight till he died, right?
Yeah.
Was that the comeback? That was the big comeback. Oh no, that was Brown.
Yeah.
I think
can't remember.
Bigfoot just smoked him. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Bigfoot just smoked him.
Yeah.
He's on like an insane losing streak. It's very sad.
It doesn't count. I'm sorry. This is not Bigfoot anymore. This is very small foot.
He defeated Fedor Emelianenko, so like huge. Like he has wins over Arlovsky, and
never a super nuanced game, but fine.
Yeah, during that like kind of like I don't know what you would call it, TRT era of UFC. I think he did end up popping a couple of times, maybe.
Of course, I respect
his fights with like Mark Hunt, which are awesome. Just really for a heavyweight, a very, very watchable action fighter.
Yeah, and I remember him getting knocked out in a really funny way by Frank Mir that one time. I think that was the Barboza Johnson card. So that's like
he gets like hit with an elbow or something, right?
And I think it was like a shifting right hand or something, but he like falls flat on his back, something like that.
Oh man,
it looked really funny. It's sadder in retrospect knowing how badly he's gotten it, but yeah.
Shout out to Bigfoot. He's a real cool. He's a
respect.
He has some great fights, and his career's been too hard on him.
And speaking of guys taking things.
The GOAT. He beat Khabib Nurmagomedov.
I mean, Tebow actually has a really weirdly good resume.
Great, but unlucky. No, I don't think so. But
I would say okay. But
you would say okay. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Okay. I don't know where he would go in okay. I kind of want to put him over Thiago Moises because I like him so much more. He did kind of beat Roy McDonald.
Yeah. He beat RDA. Did he beat Pettis? I feel like he beat Pettis.
Yeah, he beat old Roy McDonald by robbing him. But
I remember that. I completely forgot that happened until you mentioned it.
Yeah. But it's kind of awesome to rob Roy McDonald when you're Gleison Tebow.
Yeah. He beat Francisco Trinaldo, who is officially good Gleison Tebow.
Yeah. He has a lot of wins in his career. Will Brooks, Wilber's not good.
Oh, I was thinking of Clay Guida versus Pettis. I'm a
Jamie Varner, he has a win over
moron.
Jamie Varner. Trinaldo, yeah, like we said, Dos Anjos. You know, names like Cal Luna, who aren't great, but are definitely names.
Those are they're guys.
You know, Jeremy Stevens. He was around for a long time, and he was really jacked, and he beat Khabib Nurmagomedov.
Yeah.
So, what's not?
Yeah, I mean, the only argument for
And
and he lost to Michael Johnson in a very cool way.
Did we leave him to the end on purpose so that the like Khabib stands who sometimes complain in the comments of the podcast won't hear that T-Bow is like?
I know that guy will definitely hear it. There's this one guy who listens to every podcast.
Oh yeah,
all the way through.
Hello to that guy. We're like 4 hours in, so you're amazing.
How's it going? We love you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Gleason T-Bow, I do love him because the Michael Johnson knockout was so cool, where like he got his stance angled into and had to turn very slowly and got killed in the middle. But yeah, he's got some really weirdly good wins. Just he caught them kind of early, like RDA not in his prime, Khabib not in his prime, and he did beat Khabib. I haven't actually rewatched that fight, but I'll go with it. Just got old, got off the sauce.
And it's like he's got some, because he was such a low pace kind of like low action fighter. He has like close losses to good guys like Evan Dunham, that type of stuff. And Khabib Nurmagomedov obviously is like this this very close.
It's the kind of thing where it's kind of like his fight with Khabib is kind of like a much less actiony version of like Makhachev versus Sarukian, where you're never actually gonna like get a ton done, but you're gonna make it just impossible for the other guy to really beat the crap out of you the way he wants to. So it's like it's easy to argue with being a close fight. It's just the upside is all on the other guy. So that's my actual unironic position on it. My real position is that T-Bow won 30-26.
And he is the GOAT lightweight.
Yeah.
No. Anyways.
All right. So that's one.
We can I guess we can do a quick like review. The GOATs.
Yeah.
Jose Aldo's the GOAT.
Of course.
Clear number 1. RDA to me, clear number 2.
Yeah.
Charles Oliveira, clear number 3.
Clear number 3.
I think Davison and Silva, the greatness is there's a really wide gap in the career length.
Yeah.
But I do feel like Davison Figueiredo, just better division, better resume.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing is it's hard to compare among divisions, but within division or like among tiers, but within tiers it's kind of easy. Like I'd put a Sun Tzu very like almost middle of the GOAT tier if he had his opportunities, but he didn't.
Yeah, that's the point of the great, right? Because the G in GOAT tier is for great. They're
exactly.
Still, right? It is still like, oh, well, they're great. Great. It's just lucky, unlucky. Right? Yeah. Really, it's the guys who are in great but lucky, who don't have an excuse for not being GOATs, right?
Exactly.
Like, you got all the luck. You should be like, that, and that's kind of why I put Anderson Silva there, because he's great but lucky, and he
was a GOAT,
and he made use of all that luck by having an insane win streak and
that's a great way to put it
easily, right? It's like some of these guys, Shogun, Verdum, right, Vanderlei, they didn't they were really lucky in like terms of like the skill level or the state of a division, right? And they didn't like dominate it for a decade like Anderson Silva did.
That's why Pereira has some real upside, because he's lucky, very lucky, but he has the upside to get to actual great tier just because actual GOAT tier just because he has the potential to make use of it. But I think a lot of these, they kind of overlap in interesting ways. Like I think Assunção is probably a better fighter overall than Figueiredo, but there's
I think that's fair, but to me Figueiredo is like, there is like an element of like, wow, that first Moreno performance,
exactly,
the third fight, the comeback, the like style change, right?
Yeah,
stuff like that. And also just how scary he was in his prime, and like the way Assunção wasn't, obviously, like a terror.
And I think it goes in a similar way too for like great but lucky versus great but unlucky. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's not really like subordinate. It's more that the great but unlucky guys had scope to go up, and the great but lucky guys had scope to go down.
Yeah.
But if you look at someone like Marlon Moraes at his best, it's literally impossible to say he wasn't pretty much as good as Assunção, considering that he beat him arguably twice.
Yeah, of course.
But it's interesting. So
I'd say it should be pointed out, like, although Assunção is probably the best guy who isn't in the GOAT tier, the great but unlucky and great but lucky are not different skill tiers. They're just different differentiations of great.
Yeah.
Yeah, contender. I love this tier. I love a lot of the guys in
Yeah,
here.
these guys rock.
I love Brazilian contenders. They're really fun. Even someone like Paul Costa, who has like a horrible personality, and it's crazy annoying. It's still like insanely fun to watch, and has the
Yeah.
cool game for middleweight.
It's just watch any of the guys in this tier, and like maybe someone like Trinaldo doesn't always give you a fun fight, but he gives you something worth watching, which is the important
or like
part.
Damian Maia, you're impressed by how like old and slow he is, and then
Exactly.
to win, right? And then a lot of these guys are action packed, just awesome dudes.
Yeah.
Action fighter. These are guys who I think there's an element of disrespect to some of them, right? In that like we don't think they can beat guys who are actually capital G great.
Yeah, but I do think the top 4 or 5, I respect them a lot in terms of like if they were luckier, they would be in the contender tier.
Yeah.
They just weren't.
And maybe not lucky is the right word, but just like different career paths. You know,
exactly.
start either younger or don't start so young. In the case of
Almeida.
Yeah. Sorry, my brain's turned off. Yeah.
We've been here for almost 4 hours.
Yeah, we love these action fighters. You know, ZDS, awesome. DSDA, awesome. Alcantara, so many great fights. Barcelos, some awesome fights. Like, we love the Brazilians. The OK tier is probably the guys who I have the least emotional attachment.
Same.
And the Gracie tier is for the worst vile human beings on earth who deserve zero respect.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of like Wilson Hayes, but he's good where he is, which is I think the point. We've been very impartial with this list.
There's no emotional bias to any of these at all.
Of course. I mean, I actually think that's I wouldn't say no, but I would say that we put them in the right place. Like, obviously we want Charles Oliveira to be very high, but he's in the right spot.
Some of these guys I would actually put like probably lower if I was being like totally objective about everything, but I respect their careers enough to put them like higher.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I feel like there's a pretty pleasing normal distribution to this. Like a whole bunch of them are like we have the same amount in Great But Lucky as we do in Action Fighter, pretty much, which is pretty cool. But
yeah, there's a nice distribution, and it shows really like just the class of Brazilian there's been in UFC history. How many varied, but also similar in a lot of ways, people out of that country have been, and how fun and how important to divisions they've been. Like, I don't think of, even like guys who are just in the solid contender, I don't think of that era of lightweight without thinking about Edson Barbosa. I totally think about Edson Barbosa's career when you get there, right? I totally think about it a lot. They're really memorable fighters. They have really entertaining styles, Moicano, Lineker, Burns. And really fun fighters who make impact on divisions, and also some all-time greats out of that country. Really is like one of the great countries in the sports history.
I would say there's a really good chance that they're the greatest country in MMA so far.
Just because of the peak with Aldo.
I mean, like a lot of people, they want to say it's Russia, and I'm open to that eventually. But as of now, I don't really know if there's much of an argument. Just like looking at this list,
America obviously has this insane volume on them that is amazing. To be honest, it's like they have, So I think for now it's probably America. We'll see where Russia and Brazil.
America doesn't count. Let's be honest.
Because everyone's an immigrant.
Just everyone. Everyone's from America. You don't get the credit. At this point, with America, you have to split it up into states.
Is a Jamaican. He counts for Jamaica. He's not an American.
Well, I mean, at that point, Jamaica actually does have some good guys. Then, if we want to do that, that's Leon and Aljo.
But Brazil, awesome fighting country, awesome fighters, great history.
Honestly, it's like the diversity in these guys is what gets me, because like you got an even split of just insane action fighters with some of the most commanding guys in the sport. So you can really tell the split. Like it's not homogenous at all. So it's very cool.
Some of the toughest fighters in the sport's history, some of the most insane fights there's ever been, most iconic moments with these guys.
Yeah,
it's awesome. We really appreciate all MMA fighters for the crazy, hard, difficult, scary sport they do. But me and Sriram, we love the Brazilians. That's why we did this. We have an affinity for them, obviously, and this is the tier list. This is the ranking.
Thank you for joining us, everybody.
Thank you.